applications. The first one on tonight's agenda is land between Platt Lane and Station Road, Keyworth. Mr. Pegram, I think you're talking us through this, please. Your phone's ringing.
Mine? Throw it away. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry about that. Chairman, the first application on the agenda this evening relates to a site on Platt Lane, Keyworth. This is one of the Part 2 emerging allocations in the Part 2 of the local plan. Unlike some of the previous applications, Chairman, just to set the scene, due to the timing of some of the previous applications, or the fact that there wasn't a developer involved at submission stage, previous applications have come to you in outline form. So you're only required to consider the principle of development, perhaps with access to be considered with the outline application. In this instance, Chairman, there is a developer involved with this one promoting the site. So the application before you this evening is an application seeking full planning permission. So you are being asked to consider issues of principle, access, layout, scale, landscaping and appearance of building. So it's the whole issues that you're considering as part of this application. The application site is as indicated on the screen before you. It's at the northern end of Keyworth. You've got the British Geological Survey to the south-east. There's some playing fields to the north-northeast with a railway line. Beyond that, more fields and the A606, as you can see, just creeping into the plan there in green. That's the aerial photograph, just showing you sort of real time in terms of what the site looks like with the British Geological Survey here. What I'm going to do in terms of the photographs, Chairman, is take you on a bit of a trip round the area, starting up on the A606, coming along the A606, down Platt Lane, and then around the bottom end and up Station Road. I will point out some points, some landmarks, if you like, as we go along. There's a bridge here, you'll note. There's a pair of cottages, or a terrace of cottages here that I'll make reference to. There's the sports ground, and over this side, obviously, there's the existing properties on the western side of Station Road, and there is a stile, which I'll point out, that's roughly in this location. There is a footpath that runs along that northern boundary, and then it comes across at that point down onto Station Road, as I say. So we're on the A606. This is the junction to Platt Lane. So turning right down Platt Lane will take us southerly towards the site. So again, we've just gone around the corner. We're looking down the hill towards the bridge. You can just see coming in here that I referred to, the railway bridge. And then a closer shot as we get to that bridge, and then under the bridge and through to the other side. That's the little terrace of cottages I pointed out on the aerial photograph for you, just to get your bearing in reference to that. And then a bit further down, and we can look in a generally westerly direction towards the sports pitches and the facilities associated with that site. Chairman, I'm just mindful there are a number of people come in standing. Do we want to just pause for a second to get some more chairs out? Sorry.
Yes, there's rather a few more people here than we were expecting. So if we just pause for a moment, we'll get some chairs out for you, because it's going to be painful for you standing for so many hours. So we'll just get some chairs. No, we need that one, please. Right, thank you very much. I think we want you to be comfortable. The gentleman right at, you're standing. Are you okay standing there? Oh, I see. I understand. Right. Mr. Pegg.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'll resume the presentation. So looking generally in a westerly direction from Platt Lane into the sports facility there. And then a bit further down, looking back towards the north, that's that terrace of cottages you can see on the right here. So in this shot, we're now alongside the application site, which is behind this hedge. Turning around now, this is from the access to the British Geological Survey, looking up the hill again, sorry, in the northerly direction. So the site is behind this hedge. And then turning around, looking more southerly, again from the British Geological Survey application, down the hill, and the application site is on the right here. There is a footpath entrance into the site at this point. So the photographer's just jumped through the hedge, through that gap, and he's looking across the site in a southerly direction. So this is the boundary with Platt Lane. Goes round the bottom and then up the other side to Station Road. Again, that's looking now from that same point in a more westerly direction. So we're panning round the site and then looking back towards the sports facilities, which I shall make reference again to this boundary treatment here and the sports facilities. That's looking again from Platt Lane into the existing car park to the sporting facilities. And then walking along the footpath, looking back to the east, towards the east, southeast, to those that terrace of cottages that you saw on Platt Lane. Again, looking from the site through the boundary treatments to the sports pitches. And then looking more westerly up the footpath now with the sports facility on your right. Again, from the footpath looking back, just to give you a flavour of the relationship of the site with those sporting facilities. This is now at the top northwest corner of the site, is effectively looking down, if I get my map, Chairman. Looking down that northwestern boundary. So this is the northwestern boundary, then that's the boundary with Station Road. The footpath continues along this boundary. Looking back from that same point, so that's in that top corner of the site. And then again looking along that boundary with the Station Road beyond. This is the stile I mentioned, so that's not actually within the application site. That stile sits west of the boundary with the application site. But you can see here there is a difference in level down onto Station Road. That's effectively stood outside the application site, but looking back towards that northwest boundary. So the application site is beyond that boundary treatment. And then standing on Station Road, looking at that point. So that's again, you saw the view from the start at the top, looking back up those steps from Station Road. That's looking again up Station Road, and there's another railway bridge at that point. So the application site is behind us in this shot. Just again approaching that railway bridge. And then back on Station Road, the application site starts roughly at this point here where you can see the bus stop, and is behind this belt of trees. There are existing properties on this side of the road, as you'll see as we move down the road, and there is a difference in character and style of properties in this area. As we move along this road, the difference in level between Station Road and the application site becomes less. So it does drop down to the point where the access is pretty much at the level of the road level. So again, looking at that belt of trees. And just to give you a flavour, obviously these were taken when the trees weren't in leaf, so you can get the full sort of effect of the belt of trees both in summer and winter. This is stood pretty much opposite where the access would go in, and you can see at this point the road and the site are roughly level. That's the existing field gates, which is just north of the access, and again it does give you a feel for the level differences and where the site in relation to the road. And then again looking across the site from that field gate, now obviously in the summer with trees in leaf, so you can see the properties on the opposite side of the site down towards the south. That's looking across again, picking up those 3 cottages if we use those as a landmark, and then British Geological Survey in this area. And this is the property which sits directly opposite where the proposed access would go. Access would be roughly in this position, so it's not directly opposite the house itself necessarily. It is slightly staggered offset, but still opposite their curtilage. That's again looking, so the house you just saw is to the left. That's the next property to the northwest, up the hill. And then again turning around, looking back across at the site with those trees. Change of season again, but looking down towards where we get to the Platt Lane junction with the site. So at this point we're now adjacent the south western corner. Just see the junction with Platt Lane and Nicker Hill coming up down here. Application site in these shots is on the left, behind this hedge. And then you see the road going up, which takes you up to Nicker Hill, and Platt Lane is on the left in this shot, just beyond view. You can see it there, that's Platt Lane. And just looking across from Platt Lane Junction at again, some of the different characters of properties that are in the area. So, Chairman, that's the extent of the application site as you saw. Just to pick up those landmarks again, BGS here, the terrace of cottages and the sports facilities. And the property I showed you where the access would go in is this one over here. So it's effectively just opposite their property. This is the proposed layout which you are being asked to consider. If I zoom in a bit. The application site is allocated, or is in the emerging allocation, is allocated for 190 dwellings. This application before you this evening is for 187. You can see that there's also areas of open space proposed in the... Where's my pointer gone? No, it won't point while it's zoomed in. But you can see obviously the areas of open space. The big kidney dish-shaped area is the attenuation basin, which forms part of the sustainable urban drainage for the site. And then this area here is a proposed grasscrete parking area for 40 spaces for use by the playing facilities, the leisure facilities. You can see from this there are obviously more detailed landscaping plans, but there are proposals to retain the trees and hedgerow mostly along this boundary. There's 2 or 3 trees would be removed at that point to give way for the access. 2 access points on this proposal, one off of Station Road, one off of Platt Lane here, and obviously you can see additional buffer planting around the edge of the site. There's also a proposal for a play area in this area, which would be an equipped play area. And you can now see on this one, you can just pick out, that one is a bit faint, but the affordable housing is in that area there. So those properties there and here. There's affordable housing here and affordable housing up at the top of the site. The proposal would provide 20% affordable housing in accordance with the emerging policy and our requirements for this area. Again, just zooming in a little bit on the layout to give you a feel for the layout of those properties and the relationship of them. And other plans do include some landscape details, which again, you're being asked to consider, but effectively tree planting in some of the areas between properties and around the perimeter of the site. Again, you can see the general gist of the landscaping there. And again, this is the area where the attenuation basin would be located, children's play area, 40-place parking area, access from the existing parking area to the sports pitches. While I'm on this slide, Chairman, just to highlight one issue, clearly there is a cricket pitch just beyond this boundary, and one aspect that was raised with us, both by the sports facilities, residents and Sport England, was the issue of possible ball strike from the cricket pitch. What we've negotiated with the applicants and is subject of a condition is the provision of a ball stop net, along this boundary, obviously to provide some barrier to stray cricket balls. The other aspect, Chairman, is that the club has aspirations to expand the facility and improve it. And although it's not part of this application, there are discussions which have taken place with the applicant, which could see part of this area taken over by the sports pitch area to enlarge the cricket oval and provide improved facilities which enables them to play in higher leagues. So again, that's something which we have facilitated those discussions, and I believe there's an agreement now in respect of that possible expansion of the cricket pitch. Again, providing with flavours, small pockets of green space and landscaping amongst the dwellings. There's 2 trees to be removed at this point, otherwise this hedge and tree line is proposed to be retained. And there would be also footpath links from within the development to the footpath you saw at the northern part of the site to provide connectivity to that network. Just some details of the play area, Chairman. You can see the type of equipment that is proposed to go in this play area. This has been scrutinised by your Community Development Manager. There were some initial concerns about the type of equipment and the layout that was proposed, but that's now been resolved and he is now content with the proposals for the play area. That would be secured obviously through the conditions in the Section 106 agreement. Just to give you a flavour of the type of dwellings you're being asked to consider, Chairman, I won't go through every house type. You'll be pleased to see that the proposal does include the provision of some bungalows, and in particular our Conservation Officer, who deals with design issues as well, was pleased to see that they are attractive bungalows. In his view, sometimes it's difficult to make bungalows attractive. His words, not mine. But you'll see from the images in a moment that they've taken some time to provide some quite nice details, arched brickwork over the windows, a mix of roof materials, slate and clay tiles, etc. Those are another one of the bungalows. So I say I won't dwell too long on these unless anyone has any particular questions about them. Again, mix of accommodation in terms of number of bedrooms as well. And then some of the houses. Clearly, the affordable housing units, Chairman, should be tenure blind. So you would not drive onto the site and say, oh, there's the affordable housing. They would be designed in the same design, same appearance, same sort of landscaping, so that they don't come across as standing out as affordable housing units effectively. Again, variation on the house types here with introducing some render. Again, rendered panels here. Bay windows, tile above bay window. So it gives you a feel for the general design and appearance of the dwellings that are proposed on the site. Chairman, this site is still in the green belt. It is proposed to be released from the green belt once the Part 2 local plan is adopted. At the moment, Chairman, any positive resolution by the Council has to be referred to the National Planning Casework for consideration. Effectively, if members were minded to agree the recommendation this evening, we then refer it to the Casework unit. They consider it and determine whether they want to call the application in for consideration by the Secretary of State or whether within a 3-week period, I think it is, they write back to us and say, no, we don't want to call it in, go ahead and grant permission. So the recommendation before you this evening, Chairman, clearly, just to reiterate, this is one of your emerging Part 2 sites that will deliver or contribute to the 5-year housing supply. And the recommendation is that it's referred to the National Planning Casework Unit, and if they don't call it in, the Executive Manager for Communities is authorised to grant planning permission, subject to the prior signing of a Section 106 and the conditions that are set out in the report before you this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Now, we have public speaking and interested parties speaking at our meetings, and I have one speaker registered for this application, and that's Helen Dawkins, who is the applicant, or you're on behalf of the applicant. Sorry, you are I beg your pardon, you're the applicant. So the way it works, you found the right seat, and you have, yes, you've got up to 5 minutes. And as soon as you start speaking, the clock will start timing down. And it's not a two-way discussion. It's literally you talking to us. So as soon as you're ready, and if when you're ready, press the right-hand button. The red light will come on. Okay, thank you.
The Local Plan Part 2 considers that Keyworth has scope to sustain around 580 dwellings. The site off Platt Lane is identified as an allocation for around 190 homes. and the application has therefore been drawn up broadly in line with this requirement, delivering a total of 187 new homes. The density of the proposed development equates to 20.8 dwellings per hectare, which is wholly consistent with the development strategy and policy H3 of the Keyworth Neighbourhood Plan, which advises that the average density of the proposed housing allocations within Keyworth should be about 20 and 30 dwellings per hectare. Two suitable means of access are proposed off Platt Lane and Station Road, in full accordance with policy requirements. Both access positions have been fully considered by the Highways Authority and are considered to be acceptable. A robust assessment has been undertaken to demonstrate that the increased traffic to the highway network and highway safety issues are not of concern, and with the imposition of appropriate conditions and financial contributions to assist in the proposed upgrading to the strategic road network, localised highway improvements, along with contributions to enhancements to the local bus service, bus stops and provision of bus passes, all highway issues have been fully addressed. The proposed development delivers a wide range of both market and affordable housing. The market mix includes a strong provision of 2 and 3 bedroom properties in accordance with the aspirations of the neighbourhood plan, to increase the provision for starter households. In addition, 20 bungalows are provided on site, equating to 13% of the total market mix. This is significant given the national average of bungalows provided on residential sites is 1.5%, and clearly shows that the need for bungalows within Keyworth has been acknowledged. 20% affordable dwellings are to be provided on site, representing a broad mix of 1 to 3 bedroom homes, entirely consistent with the requirements supported by the Council's Strategic Housing Officer. A variety of house types have been used, incorporating distinct architectural details. For example, the use of dental brickwork details and courses, featured rendered gables, variation of window and porch styles, and a palette of high-quality materials. A fabric-first approach has been taken to design to minimise the demand for heat and power through energy-efficient fabric and services, and accordance with proposed conditions will facilitate the requirements for electric vehicle charging points. With regards to the wider community benefits, the proposed development makes financial contributions towards improvements at Keyworth Primary Care Centre and Keyworth Leisure Centre, and of utmost importance is wholly supportive to the needs of the adjacent sports club. The application provides for a 40-space Grass Creek car park to be transferred to the adjoining sports club for their sole use to provide additional car parking facilities for their users. Discussions have taken place with the sports club in the design of our development, assisting the club to future-proof the expansion of their sporting needs. Sufficient buffers are provided to avoid any conflict with the new dwellings and the potential provision of new sporting facilities. The application site provides for 3.34 hectares of public open space on site, including a local equipped area of play and improvements to the public right-of-way to be retained in its existing alignment. Part of the open space provision is a buffer around the entire site, allowing for an offset to both Platt Lane and Station Road to the new dwellings, ranging between 20 to 58 metres. The provision of this buffer allows for the majority of the existing vegetation around the periphery of the site to be retained, with the only exceptions being removal for the accesses and footpath linkages to the south. To conclude, the proposed development relates well to the existing built form and delivers an appropriate new settlement edge and transition to the wider landscape. The application will deliver much needed housing, including affordable housing, to an area which has significant undersupply of deliverable housing sites and a severe need for affordable housing, as demonstrated by recent appeal decisions. To conclude, the application fully accords with the presumption in favour of sustainable development requirements of the NPPF, and as such, I would respectfully urge the committee to follow the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was well within time. So thank you for that. We were going to hear from Councillor Edivine, one of the ward members, but he's not going to be with us tonight. But he sent me an email saying that he had originally raised some objections, but he is now happy that the objections he raised have been met and therefore didn't feel the need to come along tonight, or wasn't able to come along. But he wants us to bear in mind the sports club and cricket section are future-proofed by the arrangements, that we're satisfied with the highway reports, and that we should be aware of mitigation and minimum impact on the environment. So that was an email he sent to me last night. So he's basically saying he's overcome the objections he had originally raised. So we can open up to discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Pegram, yes.
So, Chairman, just one quick...
Sorry, yes, you need to come back on...
well, nothing that the applicant referred to, Chairman, but I did neglect to refer to the fact that attached to your report is a Section 106 Heads of Terms table, which sets out the preliminary heads of terms, I would stress that they are still subject to negotiation and subject to contract and final agreement. However, Chairman, the other thing I want to do is a late update to the update I sent out yesterday, which is condition 25. We were suggesting a change to the wording to relate to the 31st of August. We're now suggesting, Chairman, that the condition should be as worded in the report, so there's no change to that condition. The other aspect is, and the applicant did refer to this, is there is a package of measures for highway improvements. Part of that relates to improvements under the Memorandum of Understanding between the Council and the Highways England, which is improvements to the junction. It's this road that runs up to meet the A606, and there are proposals for improvements to that junction to increase capacity and safety, etc. So, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So now we can open it up to discussion and debate and come to a decision. Who would like to start, please? Councillor Bidsall.
Can we just clarify something? Is the whole reason that this has come to the committee this evening is Councillor Edivine's objection, which has now been withdrawn, or is it that plus the fact that it's currently in the green belt?
I suspect it's a combination, and also one of the other ward members had declared an interest as well, because Councillor Cotty is involved with the football club and cricket club next door. So he mentioned that as an interest.
But declaring an interest isn't a reason to bring it to the committee, is it?
It is.
If we could have an answer.
Yes.
Okay, Chair, I was going to say that there was nothing to add to what you said. Yes, obviously we were making a positive recommendation to this committee. So in accordance with the scheme of delegation, it would have to come before committee where there's an objection from a ward councillor. Similarly, if there's a declaration of interest from a ward councillor, it has to come to committee. But again, in this instance, you're quite right in terms of it's not because it's in the green belt necessarily, but we have taken the view that prior to the adoption of the local plan part 2, any of these sites that come forward prior to adoption, we would bring before this committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Is that helpful? Good, okay. Councillor Healy, I've got you next on the list to speak.
Thank you. Mr. Pegram, it's only 2 months since we sat here discussing Nicker Hill, and I expressed great concern at the time that Platt Lane would be used as a rat run to get out of Keyworth. You assured me to some extent that, well, no, the traffic will go down Station Road and come out through Plumtree. And here we are now, and I find that not only is Platt Lane going to be used as an entrance to the site, we've almost got a contradiction in terms here. That Platt Lane is not quite a single track road, but it certainly isn't a dual highway, and there's very little room, I feel, to find extra space. Once you get as far as the bridge, we have no footpath at all. And I'm really concerned about traffic coming out of the development, turning left into Platt Lane, out to the junction with the 606. And having read through the detail, I'm struggling to see what the plan is for that junction. Are we talking about traffic lights? Are we having some sort of control? Are we road widening? Are we putting a footpath right through the lane? Because I'm aware a lot of people walk out of Keyworth, Platt Lane, across the road into Stanton-on-the-Wolds. The development itself I have no problem with at all, but I really am just concerned about the accessibility and the potential traffic problems.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Healy. Could we pick up on that, please?
Sorry, Chairman, yes.
Platt Lane in particular?
My recollection, Chairman, of the advice that I provided this committee last time was that certainly, yes, Platt Lane is a way out of Keyworth up onto the A606. The intention is that this is a better route in terms of the carriageway, width of carriageway, and the improvements that are proposed to the A606 would hopefully make that a more appealing junction for residents to use. Clearly, we cannot control human nature. If if they so decide to go up this road, we can't stop that. But as I say, the intention is that the improvements would make that other junction more appealing, and that would be the preferred route for people. Clearly, Highways Authority and Highways England have been consulted on this proposal. Neither of them object. So I note your concerns, and hopefully my comments again reassure you that hopefully this will be it's off the screen, a more appealing junction for people to use.
You want to come back on that?
I'm sorry, just
Yeah.
so really the junction Platt Lane onto the A606 is as now. There's no proposal to change that whatsoever. No footpaths to the main road either. Okay, thank you. I foresee problems.
I think, as you say, Platt Lane literally is a lane, and it's quite bendy and, frankly, in quite poor condition as well. It's very bumpy. So perhaps it could be argued that if someone was living there and they got a choice of Platt Lane or Station Road, perhaps local knowledge would encourage people to use the main road. But I do understand your points. It's always a worry about the impact on the road. Councillor Thomas, please.
I'm just wondering if, apart from the vehicle access points, if there are footpath accesses from the site onto Station Road and Platt Lane.
Chairman, yes, this has been a source of discussion with the applicants and the Highway Authority. Clearly, we need to try and retain as many trees along this boundary as possible. The Highway Authority would have liked to have seen a pedestrian point here, as I understand it. But as you saw in the photographs, there is quite a change in level, and there is an existing pedestrian footpath that comes out just north of the site. So the proposal does include some pedestrian access onto Platt Lane. There's a footpath running inside the site, obviously to try and preserve the trees, and there's connection obviously to the footpath that runs through the site as well. So the view was taken, Chairman, that there is good connectivity to the neighbouring footpath network, and obviously residents have a number of options to choose from. You can see, you can just see one of those footpath links at the bottom there as well.
Is that helpful? So basically, yes, there are footpath links.
Can people get out at the top there, top left there, can they get out onto the public footpath from the site?
Public footpath runs through the site and then goes across here down onto Station Road. So yes.
Thank you.
Right. The next speaker on the list is Councillor Major, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just clarify, in the section 106, it says primary not required. Is that them or is that us saying that we don't need any contribution towards primary education?
Chairman, that is the views expressed in consultation with the Education Authority. Clearly, we can only justify collection of primary school contributions where there is a capacity issue in the local schools. Keyworth is one of those perhaps somewhat unique areas in the borough where the schools do have capacity and there's no need for a contribution. But it comes from the Education Authority. It's not the applicants. Obviously, we would seek the views of the education. If they felt there was a need, we'd ask for a contribution.
Thank you. And Councillor Brennan, please.
Thank you. There's a couple of detailed points at paragraph 148 and 151 which concerned the parking, the size of the parking spaces and the potential for a problem with access to for the fire service or emergency vehicles onto the site. And I can't see later on in the revised information where that has been, or if that has been addressed, and I can't tell from looking at that detailed plan what the parking sizes are. And the second point was, could you provide a breakdown of the mix of social housing? And I note that one of the original commentary was regarding whether 4-bedroom social housing could be provided on this site, and I'm assuming from the presentation we had that decision has been taken not to provide 4-bedroom social housing on the site, and what the explanation for that might be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're just rapidly looking through the report here, so we'll just check. So it's
Chairman, on the issue of the parking space sizes, my understanding, I can't find the relevant paragraph at the moment, but my understanding is that those issues were drawn to the attention of the applicant. There were discussions over the layout of the site, and those issues were addressed and the Highway Authority was satisfied. So, yes, they were picked up through the discussions with the applicant. In terms of the affordable housing mix, again, if I can draw your attention to page 124, the proposal is for 8 social rent units, and you can see the breakdown of accommodation, 15 affordable rent units, including a 4-bedroom unit, and intermediate or shared ownership, as it's sometimes referred to, is 14 units. So that's the breakdown of the affordable housing. Again, that's arrived at in consultation with our strategic housing manager.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Right. I don't have any other speakers indicated to speak at the moment on this one, so do I take it that everyone is quite happy with Councillor Purdue-Horan?
Can I move the proposal to accept the recommendation, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you can. Do you have a seconder for that, please?
I'll
Councillor Beardsley.
second that proposal.
Thank you. So the recommendation as shown has been proposed by Councillor Purdue-Horan, seconded by Councillor Beardsley. Does anyone else wish to speak on this, or are we happy to go to a decision? I think we've probably covered a lot of detailed application and had some questions. Can I have a show of hands, please, for those in favour of the recommendation as shown on page, as shown on
107, Chairman.
107 onwards. Show of hands in favour, please show, please. So that's unanimous. So thank you very much. Permission is granted for that application as per the report. Thank you. Right, so we'll move on to our next application, which is land on Wilford Lane, West Bridgford. This is a hybrid application, which is a mix of full planning permission or planning application along with an outline application, and this will all be explained during the report. It is a slightly unusual application to have a hybrid. You don't get them very often, but we will hear all about it. And Mr. Taylor, please, if you could take us on this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just so members are aware, again, we have received a number of late reps which are in the papers before members for their consideration in relation to the application along with the original report. Application site is on Wilford Lane. It sits between the Beckett School to its immediate north, and Wilford Lane is the boundary to the south. Members will probably be aware of the crossroads between Wilford Lane, Beckett Way down to the school, and Compton Acres into the housing development there. Also, as a useful reference point on the edge of the development, members will note the tram position and residential developments to the east. Moving to the aerial photograph, again, just to give a bit more context of what it looks like, where the site is and its relationship to its neighbouring built form. As Chairman's advised, the application is a hybrid application and it seeks full planning permission for a range of commercial uses on the western part of the site and outline planning permission to establish the principle of a residential use on the eastern part of the site. Each of those two elements propose their own access points, with the commercial units accessed via Beckett Way and the residential units directly off Wilford Lane. Only the access arrangements for the residential use are to be considered at this stage. Therefore, concerns regarding scale, location, parking levels, overdevelopment, dominance, etc. are all reserved matters at this stage for the residential use. However, the full details for the commercial element, that's the scale, the layout, the design, the landscaping and the appearance of the public house, supermarket, the 3 retail units, the proposed coffee shop, are all matters that members must consider as part of this application. The site is classified as previously developed land, although the restaurant that previously occupied the central part of the site has been demolished and the rifle range has largely been reclaimed by nature. The site is currently overgrown with a mix of natural planting and a number of large protected trees located predominantly on the edges of the site. The site is located on the northern side of Wilford Lane, with Roco Gym and residential development on Compton Acres to the south, the Beckett School to the north. To the east, there are residential dwellings on Beedling, which are these properties here, and there's also the school playing pitches bounding the site in this corner. To the west, there is a plot of currently undeveloped land, beyond which is the tram I'd previously referred to. The site's previously been granted planning permission for a Sainsbury's store, however that permission has lapsed. The site is considered to be in a sustainable location on the edge of the city with good access to public transport options, and it's also noteworthy that the site is within the floodplain. The application is seeking planning permission to construct a supermarket, 3 retail units and a coffee shop with drive-through facility and a public house. The applicant is also seeking to secure planning permission for the principle of residential development on the site. Again, I reiterate that the scale, layout, number of residential units proposed are not matters for consideration because it's been submitted as a hybrid application. The application was submitted with a suite of technical reports that have been assessed by technical consultees. Initially, the Highway Authority objected to the proposal. However, following the submission of revised plans proposing improvements to a number of junctions and an updated transport assessment, the Highway Authority are now satisfied with the proposal's impact on traffic generation, levels of parking in the retail element and the issues of highway safety, and they do not object subject to conditions set out in the report and improvements being secured via Section 106 agreements. The landscape officer objects to the proposed loss of a lime tree on the site, which sits in the front corner roughly here, where the pub is proposed, but does not object to the wider principles of the landscaping proposed. However, members will need to balance the loss of this protected lime tree against the benefits of developing this site in accordance with the development plan, including its presumption in favour of development, all other material planning considerations, and the mitigation of proposed additional new planting along the commercial frontage of the site. The application has attracted significant level of objection from the surrounding community, and the concerns are highlighted in the report. I'm aware that one of the ward members and an objector are registered to speak, although the issues raised by objectors include, but are not limited to, highway safety, air quality, impact on childhood obesity, the lack of need for a pub, the impact on existing businesses elsewhere in the borough. The application has been subject to a retail impact assessment, which was independently assessed, and copies of the responses are available to view in full on the council's website and have been summarised in the report. But to be clear, the independent assessor's conclusions, and I'll just read these from another piece of paper, are: we agree with the applicant that the 6 sites assessed are either not suitable or not available for the application proposal. Council officers have not identified any other sites that the applicant should address as part of the sequential test, and we are not aware of any other sequentially preferable sites that the applicant should consider in its sequential assessment. In the absence of any further sites to be considered, we advise that the application proposal has passed the sequential test. They then go on to further say, we are not aware of any existing, committed or planned public or private investments in the centres within the catchment area of the application proposal. On this basis, we consider that this part of the application passes the impact test, and based on the evidence put forward, we consider that the impact of the application proposal on the vitality and viability of the West Bridgeford District Centre is unlikely to be significantly adverse, either individually or cumulatively with existing commitments. On this basis, we consider that the second element of the impact test is passed. Officers are therefore satisfied that the proposal demonstrates that it would not be detrimental on other local or district centres. The environmental health officers have advised that the air quality assessment is carried out in accordance with the current guidance and good practice, and the report uses the council's own data from monitoring air quality that's undertaken in real time over a number of years. Issues of exposure to alcoholic and sugary drinks, amongst other concerns, are also addressed within the report, Chairman. Members are reminded that they have to assess the proposal before them, but your officer's professional opinion is that the commercial units are well designed and would have an acceptable relationship to the neighbouring land uses, subject to conditions set out in the report. With regards to the residential element of the proposal, it is only the access arrangements from Wilford Lane that are and the principle of the residential use that is to be considered tonight. Whilst condition 7 does propose to cap the level and type of residential development, members are advised that this is only due to the fact that the highway reports are based on that quantum of development. if members do follow officer's recommendation to approve, the actual number, scale, positioning and form of any dwellings are matters that will be determined as part of any subsequent reserve matters submissions. Therefore, you're not determining 267 dwellings on the site, just the principle of the site being used for residential purposes. There are ongoing discussions with the applicant with regard to the Section 106 contributions in the proposal, but the headline issues are set out in the table at the end of the report. I'd now like to take members on a short guided tour around the area and its meters, and I'll start sort of just on the edge of Compton Acres, looking north towards the site, glimpse left towards the tram stop, then take members along the frontage of the site, looking in at various key points to the junction with Beedling, down Beedling, and again there's a view across into the site. There's then the footpath that runs up the side, and again there's a view across the boundary with the school playing pitches that exist here. I'll then bring you back onto Wilford Lane, along the frontage of the site, down Beckett Way to where the T-junction, where the proposed access point is, and again give you some views across the site as it is in its current form. So this is looking north along Compton Acres towards the edge of the site. You might just be able to make out the school in the background here, and the site is largely just out of view in this particular photograph. But moving forward, you will see the crossroads there. This is the lime tree that's proposed to be removed as part of the commercial element of the site, with the site largely sitting where the pointer indicates. Again, looking left, you get a view towards the tram stop and where the tram crossing runs across the edge of the borough. Turning back towards Wilford Lane, again the lime tree is the reference there, the Beckett School at the back, Beckett Way, and this is the frontage of the commercial element of the site. Moving along the frontage, members may be aware of the Roco Gymnasium, bus stops that exist on both sides of Wilford Lane, with the site sitting behind this frontage here, and then views into the site with the school just glimpsed views in the background. Members obviously note how overgrown the site has become in recent years. Again, moving further along Wilford Lane, there are views towards the Linden Homes development that sits to the back of this particular building. Beedling will appear in the next image just on the left, roughly where the pointer is at the moment. So this is the entrance into Beedling here. This is the new housing development built on Wilford Lane, currently still under construction. Moving down Beedling, you'll notice the level of development now. I think it's about 14 houses built. Some have frontage parking. And at the end of the site here is where the rifle range has largely been reclaimed by nature, but the site sits behind these houses and along the edge where the pointer is here. Again, this is the end of the row of properties on Beedling, with the site proposed behind the belt of trees that sit there. Turning 180 degrees, there's the footpath that I referred to that runs through to Gresham Playing Fields, but before you get there you pass the school playing fields, and this is the northeastern boundary of the site with the school playing fields circled with the pointer there. Back onto Wilford Lane, moving back in a westerly direction, the site will be on your right hand side, Roco Gymnasium here. View into the site, again can make out the school buildings in the background. Again, the level of nature's reclamation of the site. Again, the access point out of the Roco gym, the site fenced off, and the heavy boundary to the frontages that exist at the moment. Next image is back towards the crossroads. So we started our journey looking down here. In a moment, we'll be turning right down Beckett Way towards the secondary school. Again, noticeable at the back. And the next image will be taken where this brick wall is at the entrance of the site, looking towards the proposed access to the commercial elements, which is this image before you. The pointer pointing out the rooftop of Roco Gymnasium. And then standing at those gates, looking left, you would see the school buildings, the level of nature, and then looking right, Wilford Lane's roughly where the pointer here. This is Roco Gym. This is the proposed access. So the proposed supermarket building would be roughly here, coffee shop somewhere over here, and the public house would be just off the edge of this image to your right hand side. So this is the red line for the entire site. This is the information before us. So members are advised that everything on the western half of this image is what we have the full information for. These are the matters that members must consider in terms of scale, layout, design, appearance, landscaping. On the eastern half is the proposed residential use. Now, save for the separate access point in there, all matters are reserved, so you are just establishing whether the principle of a residential use in this part of the site is deemed to be acceptable or not. We do have detailed plans, layouts and some artistic impressions of what the commercial buildings may look like. And again, submitted within the application, there were indicative information for the residential units. Because they are a reserved matter, I'm not putting them before members, but you may notice them in the background of some of the images for the commercial element. So here we have the proposed floor plans for the supermarket. Little plan in the top corner helps orientate members perhaps. Beckett School to the north here, Wilford Lane to the front. So the highlighted building is the floor plans in question. So this is the proposed supermarket. These are the proposed elevations for that building. So you'll notice the scale, the relatively shallow pitched roof, the fact that it's single story. And here we have an artist's impression of what it would look like in a coloured up world rather than a 2D black and white drawing. Again, draw members' attention to the fact that there are residential elements shown in the background, but again, reiterate the point that those elements are reserved at this point in time. The next building proposed are the 3 retail units, again proposed in front of the supermarket. So again, you'll see 3 rectangular units of equal dimensions, again, relatively low scale development with a shallow pitched roof that goes down to an almost flat roof to the rear. 3 units of equal size with their frontage facing out into the car park. The building on the screen now is the proposed coffee shop with its drive-through elements. So again, you get a floor plan for the internal layout, a roof plan, some details of the elevational treatments, and an artist's impression of what it would look like from, this is Wilford Lane and this is the proposed access point into the residential element. Again, you can notice some of the shop units I was just referring to in the background of there. And the next images I'll show you of the proposed public house, which sits in the southwest corner of the site as part of the proposal. And so here we have the floor plans layout of the proposed public house. Again, the plan in the top corner helps usefully locate where it is in relation to the other buildings, the elevations, and a couple of artist impressions of what it would look like. As I've referred to, the application does propose the removal of the lime tree in the southwestern corner to facilitate the pub as part of the proposal. The applicants are proposing additional landscaping along the frontage, greater in number. I appreciate the tree that is there is a tall specimen. The applicant is not proposing to put in just a series of whips in tubes, if I can put it in that. They are proposing mature, semi-mature trees, and they've provided an image of the type and scale of level of planting that they are proposing with a useful reference point in terms of understanding that it wouldn't just be small scale stock that may take a significant number of years to thrive and develop and help soften the frontage of the site and potentially mitigate the loss of the lime tree if members were minded to go with the officer recommendation. Just a useful plan, again, the site shows the access point to the residential and everything to the western side that is the full element of the proposal. And as the annotation denotes, this is the outline element of the proposal for the residential use with the exception of the proposed access into the development. Officers are satisfied that the proposal is in accordance with policies. However, members are advised that the recommendation on page 181 should be revised to read, it is recommended that the Executive Manager Communities is authorised to grant planning permission subject to the prior signing of a Section 106 agreement and the conditions set out in the report. Subject to those revisions and the inclusion of the revisions in the late reps, officers are satisfied that the proposal is acceptable and are recommending the proposal on that basis, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Now, we heard a few new expressions there, such as sequential impact tests and retail tests, which I think is probably new to certainly many of us. Could we just perhaps have a little
Yes, Chairman.
pointer on that, please?
Can do. As you say, for some of the newer members, they may baffle you those terms, but effectively, when we are dealing with applications for town centre uses, so A1 retail, A3 restaurants, takeaways, that type of use, the policy requirement is that we undertake 2 tests. One is a sequential test, and effectively the sequential test is based on a hierarchical approach. So in the first preference, you would place town centre uses within your town centre boundary. Below that, you would move to edge of centre, which is typically within about 300 metres of the centre. and then stuff which is beyond that is referred to as out of centre. So clearly here we are more than 300 metres from the main centre of West Bridgford or the Melton Road shops. So the policy requirement is that we undertake a sequential test. That involves identifying whether there are any other sites, either within or on the edge of the centre, which could accommodate the development. In this instance, Chairman, it's been demonstrated that there are no sequentially more preferable sites. So we move to the consideration of this site. With retail development, we are then required to undertake an impact assessment. The National Planning Policy Framework imposes a threshold of 2,500 square metres. So if it's above 2,500 square metres, then they're required to carry out an impact assessment. We are proposing, and we're entitled to propose, through Local Plan Part 2, a lower threshold of 500 square metres. But that document is not yet adopted. So we have to revert to the national policy position, which is 2,500 square metres. I think I'm right in saying, and I'll be corrected by Paul, that this doesn't breach the 2,500. So in this instance, there was no requirement to undertake an impact assessment. Nevertheless, Chairman, the applicants did produce an impact assessment for us. We don't take that on face value. That has been looked at by an independent retail consultant, and the advice was set out for you by Mr. Taylor. Basically, the retail consultant and your officers are satisfied that this development meets the sequential tests and that the impact of this development will not have an adverse impact on the vitality and the viability, thank you, Paul, of West Bridgford Centre. So hopefully that provides a little bit more explanation to the sequential test. It is set out, and the impact test, it is set out from on page 154, paragraph 101 onwards. The other element, Chairman, I will, while I've got the mic, I will reinforce the eastern half of the development. You are asked to consider in outline only with access to be considered. The description does not mention any number of dwellings. There is a condition referred to in the report which sets an upper limit of 267. The reason for that, Chairman, is because clearly we have to have some information upon which to assess the impacts of the development on the highway network. The developers have come forward with an impact assessment on highway, basically based on 267 units. I'm not going to sit here and try and tell members that the reserve matters will not come in that form. However, I must emphasise that what you are being asked to consider is principle of residential development for an unspecified number, i.e. is that site suitable for residential development? The scale, mass, numbers, layout and the appearance of those buildings will be dealt with under reserve matters, and as Mr Taylor has advised, the only element of that aspect of the development you are considering is the access onto Wilford Lane. Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully that provides some clarity to those issues.
I think so. Thank you very much.
Could I just ask a point? So we are being asked to make one decision here, so we can't separate one or two, just one here. Okay, thank you.
That's correct. Yes. Right, we have guest speakers on this item. The first is the applicant, Mr Gillespie, if you're here. So if you could, I'm sure you know what happens. You have, we have up to 5, the way it works is up to 5 minutes for people in favour of an application and up to 5 minutes for people who are against. So Mr Gillespie is the applicant, so you have up to 5 minutes to talk to us. As soon as you're ready, press the right button, the red light will come on and the timer will start counting down. And even if anyone's in mid-flow when 5 minutes comes up, the rules say I have to stop you. Okay, thank you. So as soon as you're ready.
Good evening, Mr Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this evening about Simon's Development's proposals for Wilford Lane. Rather than reiterate a lot of detail already covered by your officers, I'd like to just highlight a few observations which I feel might be useful in the consideration of our application. First, it is important to note that the scheme before you this evening is a result of changes made following consultation. We wrote to and invited all of the site neighbours and an additional 2,000 local residents to a special consultation event in the autumn of 2018, where they could discuss the proposals with the development team. We have met 3 times with the head of the Beckett School and have held a dedicated meeting with the residents of Bede Ling. The consultation process revealed the main issues were the heights in residential buildings, traffic, safeguarding the Beckett School students, and loss of trees. In direct response to these, the outline application has, for the residential element, considered lowering the heights, looking at the reorientation, and reducing storey heights and indeed the overall numbers. Rushcliffe currently don't have a 5-year supply of deliverable sites for housing, and this proposal, whilst in outline, would make a significant contribution towards achieving that, and on brownfield rather than greenfield land. With regard to traffic, we appreciate that Wilford Lane is regarded locally as congested. However, our extensive surveys show that our development adds only an average of 6% more traffic. In addition, we will provide a number of improvements to include smart technology to the traffic lights and signals at Compton Acres Junction, to adjust the phasing of these traffic lights and improve the synchronisation of the lights with the tram. This will make flows through this key junction better than they are today. In response to concerns raised during our consultation with the residents of Bede Ling, we are also proposing to provide a keep clear box on Wilford Lane at the junction of Bede Ling to allow safer access and egress for the residents. The Beckett School were concerned about students getting off buses on Wilford Lane and walking directly through our site, the shortest route to the school. To help with this, we continue to work with the school and to devise a better marshalling approach for pupils at drop-off and pick-up times, and we've substantially increased the height and density of a proposed landscaping, creating a hedgerow to discourage crossing the car park whilst respecting the planning authority's need for permeability through the site. The school was also concerned about parents fly parking on the Beckett Way, and we are working to see if we can help influence the enforcement of the double yellow lines to discourage this. In addition, Lidl has agreed to allow parents to use their car park to at drop-off and pick-up times. We're particularly proud of the landscaping proposals, which are a huge improvement on the consented Sainsbury's scheme. And whilst it is noted and regrettable that the loss of some of the existing trees, we intend to retain a fine oak tree and approximately 90% of the trees and shrubs considered valuable by the Council's Tree Protection Officer. Furthermore, we intend to plant 112 new trees and plant almost half a mile of new hedgerows. We have already signed Lidl and Starbucks. There will be no fast food on this site. We are in discussions with 2 national family pubs and restaurant operators, and if we are granted permission, we are confident that there will be considerable interest in the remaining retail units. We would particularly be interested to hear from local independent retailers. To conclude, our proposals represent a substantial investment in West Bridgford, with the benefits of approximately 100 new jobs, and in outline, 267 new homes, including a 30% policy-compliant affordable housing element and retirement flats. And there are no unresolved objections or technical issues from the statutory consultees, and this is reflected in the office recommendation that planning permission should be granted. With your permission, we will deliver. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gillespie. And again, that's just within time as well, so thank you very much. Now, we have actually have 2 speakers who are objecting to the application. I have Mr. Sagstad and Mr. Parsons. So if Mr. Sagstad is here, it's a bit like mastermind this, isn't it? Step up to the chair. And, sorry. And
just needs to set up the 2.5 minutes.
yes, we're just set. Oh yeah. Now, as I mentioned, it's up to 5 minutes for the applicant and up to 5 minutes for objectors. So because we have 2 speakers objecting, then you'll understand that we have to, in effect, split the 5 minutes between yourself and Mr. Parsons. So I think that's probably been explained, hasn't it? So, right. I just wanted to be sure that everybody understood and knows how it all works. So as soon as you're ready, press the right button and you can address the committee. Thank you.
Good evening, members. My name is David Sagstad of Development Planning, and I speak on behalf of Scottish and Newcastle, owners of the site to the west on Beckett Way, adjacent to the Wilford Lane tram stop, the plot highlighted by the officer in their introduction. It's a matter for Rushcliffe Council to assess the overall planning merits of the development. However, I wish to raise two fundamental issues with this application which need to be resolved before its determination. Firstly, the applicant's proposed highway arrangements will inhibit access to the highly accessible and sustainable development site to the west of Beckett Way. If this site access arrangement, as currently proposed, are approved, it will likely make development of the similar, smaller site unviable. This is an important issue for the Council, as with such pressure for new development in the borough, rendering any highly accessible urban development sites unviable, will apply even more pressure for the development of less sustainable sites, such as the Greenbelt. Secondly, the transport assessment submitted in support of the application is not a robust basis for analysis upon which the proposals can be assessed. The technical information does not allow the Council to make a proper judgment as to whether the development will result in a safe and free-flowing highway network around the site. The main deficiencies have been set out in the written objection, but to highlight some of the key ones of the application, it includes an additional 130 car parking spaces with their scheme which are not assessed in the highway model whatsoever. They've assumed that 90 spaces will only ever be occupied within 187 spaces of commercial car park. If these 97 extra spaces are being provided, surely they will be used. Further to this, if this car park is full in the PM peak hour, there could be 63 extra vehicles which on Wilford Lane Beckett Way junction which have not been assessed by the applicant. Further to this, the suggestion in their report that the network will operate more effectively as signals will be synchronised is simply untrue. Their highway model provides additional traffic capacity by increasing the length of the time of the traffic lights that are on green, a fact not mentioned within the reporting at all. This demonstrates the applicant's highway consultants has misrepresented the way in which their model works to officers. I'd urge members to ask officers if these points have been considered. My understanding is they have not, and until they have, the application must either be deferred for further consideration or refused. If not, officers and members cannot guarantee that the application being considered today will not result in a severe impact on highway safety.
Thank you, Mr. Sagstad, and that was very clear and well timed as well. Our next speaker is Mr. Parsons, David Parsons. If you're here, please. And again, as soon as you start speaking, the clock will start counting down. Thank you.
Okay. I'm David Parsons. I live on Lee Close, about 400 metres from the proposed development. I've lived there for 24 years. Wilford Lane is currently a very busy road with heavy congestion at peak times. 171 new homes are currently being constructed about 200 metres from this proposed development, and permission has been granted for a further 30 homes on the lane. The traffic survey for the development, which the developers say will add 6% to the traffic on the lane, was carried out before these two developments commenced. Hence it may be invalid. In total, the developments will realistically put around 12% more traffic onto the lane. Also, this takes no account of future additional traffic onto the lane from 3,000 new homes proposed for Clifton. The new retail park will become the drop-off point of choice for pupils arriving by car at the adjacent Beckett School and will become a park and ride for the adjacent tram stop, adding further to the traffic in the area. Entry and exit to the apartments is directly off the lane opposite the Roco entrances and close to two bus stops. There will be two right turn lanes and traffic lights are less than 150 metres away. This is creating a very complex, dangerous junction area for vehicles and pedestrians. 1,000 school children pass through this area twice a day. This creates a serious safety concern. In this day and age, pubs and drive-through outlets have no place adjacent to schools. Developments of this type are notorious for attracting antisocial behaviour and litter. Too much is being crammed into too small an area. The development is too high, it will overshadow surrounding homes and is inappropriate for the location. Currently, there are supermarkets 200 and 800 metres away and pubs 200 and 400 metres away. 800 metres away, a pub is just reopening after being closed for 18 months as an unsustainable business. The development is unnecessary. If the developers are wrong, as is so often the case in their modelling and estimates on traffic, then we will be permanently stuck with an overbearing development causing congestion hazard and poor air quality. Once built, this can't be undone. I urge this committee to adopt the precautionary principle and reject the development in this form. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons, and again, well done on your timing. We're doing very well on the timing tonight, so that's it's appreciated. It's helpful. Our next speaker on this is one of the ward members, Councillor Gordon Wheeler. So you'll be talking to us. And again, up to 5 minutes as soon as you're ready. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, committee members, officers and residents. There are in excess of 160 public comments, with 80% in opposition to the development. This includes an objection from the head of Beckett School, who has safeguarding issues because of the heavy traffic that's likely to pound Beckett Way, the same corridor used by his students. And it's alarming that when message from government is for children to eat healthily, they have to walk past a pub and a drive-through coffee shop, both within touching distance from the school. Committee members will already receive a paper from Robert Coles on air pollution. I wholeheartedly endorse his comments. Because of time constraints tonight, I do not propose to repeat what Robert has said. Throughout the report, we advise the residential part of the development is only seeking outline planning permission. In other words, all the committee needs to consider is whether the land is suitable residential use together with vehicular access. I must ask the question, why is the developer ducking full planning permission at this stage? Could it be that the developer has concerns that the committee would refuse full planning permission and has therefore gone for the softer option of outline planning permission? Essentially, the council could have confirmed to the applicant the scale and massing are too important to be considered later through reserve matters. You've got the Heineken submission in front of you, committee members. The issue remains as to how can the council approve 267 apartments without knowing what the impact of these in scale and massing terms would be. I think the planning officers themselves know this. They attach conditions, e.g. 15, 16, 18, in relation to residential units when we are told that only outline planning permission is being sought. Would it not be sensible to request the application be deferred and building height parameter and key character area plans be prepared for residential development? It is my understanding that preparation of such plans is an approach taken for complex and large outline hybrid applications as you have in front of you this evening. Under recommendation 7, the residential units are capped at 267. Given this is a floodplain, the residential units are bound to be tower blocks. They can't go underground. But it could be argued theoretically the developer could scale back on the amount of units. This is highly unlikely. I'm holding up an article from Nottingham Post just a week ago, with Simon's development referred to 204 apartments plus 63 retirement apartments, which is the same figure set on paragraph 11 in front of you. There is therefore no doubt, committee and guests tonight, what the developer has in mind if to succeed with the outline planning permission. I'm sure the committee are aware of the beautiful lime tree, paragraph 162, has a TP on it. This will count for nothing if planning permission is given. It will be felled. The landscape and design officer objects to the loss of the lime tree, paragraph 161. Report advises that both pub to be relocated deep in the site. The applicants state, their words, no operators will be interested in occupying the pub. We don't need another pub. I really don't care should the applicant be right that no operator want the pub. Why should we allow a beautiful iconic tree to be felled simply to increase the profits of the developer? All along Wilford Lane, we had a raft of new developments, as mentioned earlier, over 200 homes, yet not even a hint of a community hall facility. Community facilities referred to in paragraph 212, but where is the condition that Varney, the developer, cough up Section 106 money for this? It is an absolute disgrace in Compton Acres. We have no community facility whatsoever, not even a park. Yet the same paragraph, 212, raises concerns about the impact on health and well-being. Words committee members are very cheap. Developers tell us that there will be a 6% increase in traffic. That's nonsense. As already said by the previous speaker, this is out-of-date data. The developer has offered to put in initially highways, raised objection to proposals. Developer offered then to put a couple of right turnings, paragraph 170, and also contended that although there is a shortfall of 50 car parking spaces, there'd only be a demand for 90 spaces at peak times. Normal service was resumed when highways removed their objections. There are no plans for electric signage indicating spaces available. So we face a real possibility of frustrated motorists driving off-site if demand exceeds capacity, and would-be shoppers be unaware of the parking difficulties heading up Beckett Way. Utter chaos at busy junctions with frustrated motorists looking to park in nearby residential streets. And where is the projected figure of increased vehicles from highways? Missing from the report. I would estimate something close to 15% increase is more accurate. I finish by asking you committee members to please consider my objections to this very unusual planning application. For avoidance of doubt, I'm objecting to the full planning application, the commercial element, and the outline planning application for residential units. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Weeder. Could you just turn the microphone off, please? Because it confuses the system when more than one is off. Right, thank you. So we heard from Mr. Gillespie, who is the applicant, explaining the reasoning and the background behind the application. And we heard from Mr. Sagstad, who was primarily here on behalf of Scottish and Newcastle, who owns a piece of land, development land or potential development land next door, and is pointing out problems that they think will occur as a result of this application. And we heard from the local residents, Mr. Parsons from Lee Close, who picked up various issues such as traffic congestion and is worried about cumulative impact of other developments, both on Wilford Lane and Clifton and elsewhere. And we also heard from Mr. Parsons, and we also heard from Councillor Wheeler, who was picking up on the safeguarding worries with health and safety and health and well-being and traffic issues in particular, and also made the point about it being a split application between full and outline commercial versus residential. I think that's covered most of the points. Can you pick up on any of those, please?
Yes, Chairman, I'll start. Mr. Taylor may wish to chip in or finish off if I miss anything. Just starting with Mr. Gillespie, he mentioned that the negotiations and consultation had resulted in a lowering of the height of buildings on the outline section. Can I just remind members that we are dealing with outline only, with access to be considered. Scale, which relates to height, is a reserved matter. Again, they may well have an intention to submit a scheme of the sort of indicative scale that they've proposed, but at the moment we're being asked to consider outline only. Mr. Gillespie mentioned two traders, two specific names that would occupy the units. Again, just to remind members, you are considering an application for A1 and A3 uses amongst others. You are not considering the specific users. So although a name of a trader was mentioned, it could be built, they could occupy it, it could change hands. So as I say, just to clarify, in planning terms, we don't deal with users, we deal with use classes. He also made a mention to the number of flats, and again, just to reiterate, the description of development does not include a mention of a number of units in the actual description, so it's an unspecified number at this stage. Mr. Sagstad talked about the highway assessment, Chairman. Excuse me. And I believe that members have had this document, which is produced by Mr. Sagstad, circulated to them. There was a lot of toing and froing between the applicant and your officers and the Highway Authority. The original application, Chairman, was submitted, to start getting a little bit technical, was submitted with transport modelling, which was based on what they call a transit model. Just to put it into layman's terms, and so I can understand it as well, Chairman, that would be like me giving you a VHS tape and asking you to play it on your CD or DVD player. So the Highway Authority used things called LINSIG and TRIX. So they basically said to the applicant, go away, remodel it using LINSIG and TRIX, which they did, and they presented a revised transport model. That is the model that has been subject of further discussions, and that is the model that has been used to determine the transport impacts of the development. In particular, Chairman, my understanding is that the modelling works on the basis of 2018 baseline traffic figures, 2018 baseline plus committed development, and 2018 baseline plus committed development plus the current proposal. Using, although as I say numbers aren't for consideration at the moment, using 267 as the residential element. I did speak with the highway engineer myself, Chairman, to seek confirmation. He says that the assessment does take into account the committed development and development taking place along Wilford Lane. Clearly, I think mention was made of the Clifton development. To a certain extent, the further afield you get, the more or less predictable it can be in terms of where traffic and transport will travel. He mentioned that the proposal would inhibit access to their site and prejudice any delivery of development on that site. Clearly, Chairman, at this point in time, we do not know what's going to go on that site. We've not had an application. We can't, therefore, apply the transport movements from that development. However, Chairman, in the document appendix, one of the appendices, Mr. Sagstad does include a suggested layout for a roundabout which could serve both the proposed development and the site on the opposite side of the Beckett Way. Chairman, you must consider the developments before you this evening and your highway authority consider that the access arrangements for the development are acceptable. However, I did have a chat again with the highway engineer and again, not suggesting that that roundabout is suitable for the development that will take place on the other side, because we don't know yet what development will take place on that other site. But the scheme does not prejudice the delivery of that roundabout. That roundabout could be delivered. Yes, it might be at the expense of the adjacent landowner, but ultimately you can't ask the current applicant to necessarily provide access to an adjacent site when we don't know what's going there. Again, mentioned that the transport assessment was not robust, was based on the number of parking spaces. Chairman, again, in discussion with the highway engineer, he has confirmed that using TRIX data, they use the floor space and the use classes of the development to determine what the trip rates will be, not the parking spaces. So they've used the details, and we've got a full application for the commercial element. They've used the floor spaces of the commercial units and the trip rates as predicted by TRIX data. I covered that point, Chairman, so I'm just working through my list. There was mention by Mr. Parsons of the location of the pub and other outlets near a school. Chairman, I know this is a very sensitive subject. However, we do not have a policy, either in the current development plan or the emerging development plan, which basically restricts the location of fast food outlets or that type of outlet in relation to schools. So again, we could not justify refusal. Just a bit of background, I'm aware of other authorities in Nottinghamshire who have proposed such a policy in their local plans, and it's been struck out by the inspectors. So clearly we have not proposed such a policy, we don't have such a policy, and I accept fully it is a sensitive issue, but not one that we can seek to control through the planning process at Rushcliffe. Mr. Parsons also raised the issue about the need for a pub and the need for a supermarket. Again, Chairman, we are not required to consider need. Those factors are effectively governed by the market. Mention was made of air quality. And in particular, Chairman, there was an air quality report produced which was considered by our environmental health officers. They did not object. When the resident submitted his late representation, one of the particular issues I picked up on that he raised a concern about was the cumulative impact of development and the impact of traffic on air quality. And in particular, we do have an air quality monitoring zone at the junction of Wilford Lane and Loughborough Road, or around Trent Bridge, basically. We have sought further clarification on that based on the traffic information that was provided. That has been reassessed by your environmental health officers, and they have given us confirmation that the levels of pollution are within acceptable levels, i.e. it would not be a reason to withhold planning permission. Councillor Wheeler raised the issue about, to use his term, why is the developer ducking a full planning permission? I alluded to this, Chairman, on the first application we considered, and I think I'm right in saying that in this instance, this is a landowner promoted site. They have commercial users for the commercial element, hence we have a full application for that aspect. As far as I'm aware, certainly at the time of submission of this application, there was no residential developer on board, and therefore that may explain to you why at the moment it's come in outline, and therefore the form that that development takes will be dictated by a developer when they come on board later on. And Councillor Wheeler says that, again, he makes reference to the number of units. Just to reiterate, that is not a consideration at this stage. Finally, Chairman, and again, Councillor Wheeler referred to object to the full application and object to the outline. Just to reiterate, you are considering one application. It's a package together. You can't separate them. So if you were minded to say we like the commercial but we don't like residential, you'd have to refuse the whole application, and clearly the reasons for refusal would relate to whichever element is considered to be unacceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully that was clear and helps explain things. We'll go into discussion and debate now. The first name on the list is Councillor Murray. Murray, please.
I went down Wilford Lane yesterday to have a look at the site. I use Wilford Lane quite a lot, but there are certain times of the day when I don't use it. That's before school, when the schools are coming out. I've noticed in the last few months there's a lot more HGV vehicles going along. If you get behind one of those or you get behind a bus, it's only single lane. It's not a dual carriageway. And when the bin lorry is turning into Rivermead, you have a tailback of cars until somebody can let them through. I can't believe that you're even thinking of this whole development, really, because I feel as if Wilford Lane at the moment is so congested. It's single track. Are you thinking of making it into 2 lanes either side?
Is that a question to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Chairman, I didn't want to interrupt the member by presuming that she was...
I thought you were going to say something else.
Yes. Chairman, there is no intention to dual Wilford Lane. It will remain as it stands for much of its length. As you can see on the screen, this portion of Wilford Lane is included within the red line, and there are proposals to widen the road at that point and provide right-hand turn lanes into what would be the residential element. Those improvements would be funded entirely by the applicant, obviously in negotiation with the Highway Authority.
So that answered that question for you.
Yeah, except, well, not really, because if you don't make it all dual carriageway, then there's going to be a point where it becomes single lane again. I just feel that with all the developments that have been recently on Wilford Lane, we shouldn't be considering anymore.
Well, the stock answer to that question is we have a planning application in front of us and we have to make a decision. So is there anything you want to add to that?
Only the phrase that you hear me murmur time and time again, Chairman. This has been looked at by the Highway Authority. They've considered the information submitted. They've looked at it from the point of view of their traffic and signals and their safety teams. It's not just one person that looks at this in highways. It's scrutinised by a team of people, and they don't object.
Councillor Major, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Someone raised the point about it being very handily close to the tram stop and potentially the car park being used as a park and ride facility. Is there provision within the application to have some kind of ANPR system in that, so that people who actually do want to use the facility can use the facility and it's not taken up by people taking advantage of the tram stop?
Thank you. Do we know the next?
I'm just going to review the conditions in there to see whether there's a car park management plan. I'm aware that it is often supermarket I use, I know, has a parking limitation with ANPR cameras. I'm just going to review the comments if I can just refer to the documentation for you. Thank you.
While we're looking that up, we'll just carry on with Councillor Brennan, please.
Thank you. I feel quite concerned about the nature of this application going as a hybrid to us, coming as a hybrid. I appreciate it must be a legitimate approach, otherwise officers would not have brought it to us. However, I do feel slightly as if we're being bounced as a committee into agreeing matters that we will not be able to look at again. Given that the ward councillor objects to the application, my preference at the very least would be that the reserved matters came back to the committee so that we can see the impact of the housing element of it in the context of the overall site. Because I don't object necessarily to the housing, this site being designated for housing, but I find the combination of the two, a full application and an outline application being subject to one decision, quite uncomfortable. I know that isn't a question, but it is a sufficient concern of me that it makes me feel like I would be prepared to consider rejecting the entirety of the application, even though there are merits in the application that this process has caused difficulties with.
Thank you. Well, again, we have the application in front of us as is, but do you want to...
Paul first.
Paul, Mr Taylor, yes. Paul.
Sorry, just to come back to Councillor Major's question.
Oh, yes.
Currently in the proposal there is no suggested condition for a car park management plan. If members were minded to recommend approval, that is something they could request officers to discuss with the applicant for consideration. The applicants are in the room. They are obviously listening to the discussion. They will be aware of the points raised.
And
Chairman, yes, to pick up on Councillor Brennan's point, in terms of whether the reserved matters would come back to this committee, that would be largely down to one, what the officer's recommendation were, and two, what the ward councillor's views were. Clearly, if we were minded to recommend approval to any reserved matters submission, then, and if the ward councillors objected, it would come back to this committee. With outline planning permission, though, when you grant it, they have up to 3 years to submit their reserved matters, or a specified period that we can put on it. I think the difficulty that we would have, Chairman, and I did allude to this earlier, if you are concerned by the suggestion of 267 on there, and as I say, I'm not going to try and sit here and say it wouldn't come forward in that form. It may well come forward in that form. But at the moment, you have an application for outline for residential, no numbers specified in the description, so they're not seeking permission, outline permission, for 267. On that basis, your reason for refusal couldn't be overdevelopment because of number of units, because you're not being asked on the outline, although there is supporting information and indicative information, you're not being asked to consider a number at this point.
Do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I understand that. I mean, it's reiterated throughout our paperwork, and you've made it very clear. I do understand what you're saying, and I do understand what's being asked of us. The issue I have is that the ward council has objected to this application, which, by its nature, to me, suggests that he's also objecting to the reserved matters, because this is mixed in this hybrid way, and that's where I feel uncomfortable. It's not that I don't understand it, I fully understand it. I just feel uncomfortable with this process of having the hybrid application before us. And, okay, it might take 3 years for the reserved matters to come back, but nonetheless, sitting over the top of that is a current objection by the ward member.
Anything to add to that? I think the difference of...
Chairman, yes, we can't call the ward member back because clearly we don't permit that sort of in the process, or don't allow for it in the process. I have had meetings with the ward councillors. I think it's fair to say that, yes, the residential element causes them concern, but I think it's fair to say also that they are concerned generally about traffic generation, given the development that's taken place along Wilford Lane and the impact that even the commercial elements would have on this site. So clearly, if, and again, I don't know how the debate's going to continue, but if members are concerned about traffic generation, that is a valid reason or a valid material consideration. The difficulty you would have, Chairman, and I'll repeat it again, it has been scrutinised by the Highway Authority. They do not object. If members were to refuse permission on traffic generation and congestion, we would not have the support of a technical consultee in an appeal situation, and we would have to present some other objective evidence to support any such reason for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I have two other speakers so far. Councillor Healy first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Not wishing to repeat really what Mr. Parsons or Mr. Wheeler has said, but just if I could briefly just summarise, I'm of the opinion that all the retail that is suggested for this site, all of this is very well represented locally. They're all there, so we really don't need to the cake is only so big, and the more people that have a slice, then the smaller their share will be. And I think that could result really in possibly traders struggling, suffering as we go along. I'm sure Mr. Wheeler will confirm for me. Last time I was in Compton Acres, there were 2 empty units sitting there. I don't quite know if that's still the case. Could I ask that perhaps you just highlight Beckett Way? My concern really here is access to the proposed retail park. 1,114 pupils go through those gates every day. And there is a safeguarding issue here, whether we accept it or not. Now, a roundabout we spoke about. The problem is, I understand our Scottish and Newcastle representative perhaps own that site, but at this stage we don't know what it is. And yet, going through my ream of paper, I'm sure I came across something which suggested there was a proposal, a planning proposal imminent for that site. It might help us actually if we knew what that proposal was going to be. But I do feel a roundabout would solve some of the problems in terms of access to Beckett, access to the retail park. Mr. Parsons quite rightly highlighted what the parking is going to consist of. It is going to be a drop-off point, great, but people will use it to park up. We spoke about new words. I came across a new word in these papers, trammers. Apparently these are people who park up and use a tram. And there's no doubt that's going to happen as people go into the city and park up and have free park and ride. The pub, frankly, I personally feel again, we're back to a safeguarding issue. We all know what's happening with county lines. We hear people talk about it, and I'm sure pub car parks are places where that perhaps carries on. School children walking past the site, perhaps with individuals behaving inappropriately, smoking, drinking, etc. It is a brownfield site. We have a housing shortage, which as a borough we're trying to meet. My train of thought would be take the retail out, it's all represented locally, and let's build a superb residential housing estate. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Healy. Well, again, we have the application as is before us at the moment. With regards to the neighbouring site, we indeed don't know what may or may not be applied for there, and we can't really predict what that will be, but I understand what you're saying. Mr. Pegram, do you want to add anything to that? Next speaker is Councillor Beardsall, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to get some clarification, because I don't know if it's the way I've understood these things or not, but it does appear to me that there's a little bit of confusion going on, in my mind anyway. It's about the traffic and the proposed number of dwellings. So we're being told on one hand we can't consider the number of dwellings because it's an outline application, yet on the other hand we're being told that the Highways Agency has considered the traffic based on a proposed number of dwellings. So which one is it? I really need to put my finger on this, because it's highly confusing. There's been objections about the traffic and the potential traffic implications due to the number of dwellings. I myself would always avoid that area first thing in the morning or on the way home after work, because it's an absolute nightmare. So I know what the situation is like there, and I can't see that would ever be slightly worse. It'd be a lot worse with this application. But anyway, going back to my question, what is it? Is it 267 or is it 0?
Thank you for your very clear question. Mr. Pegram.
Chairman, it's certainly not 0. It could be 267. The issue is, and to reiterate the comments that Paul made earlier and I've made previously, you're being asked to consider the principle of residential development on that site for an unspecified number of dwellings. However, clearly, when we're dealing with assessing impacts of development, we have to have some information to base a decision on. So the applicants presented supporting documentation, including a transport assessment and transport modelling, based on 267 dwellings. So if you like, that's the upper limit. That's worst case scenario potentially. they could decide, actually, we don't think there's a market for apartments here. I'm not saying this is the scenario, but they could decide not the location for apartments. We'll build 20 three-bedroom houses. And once you've granted outline planning permission, you've established a principle. What I would say is that, and I should have picked up on this earlier, perhaps in response to one of the comments of the speakers, if members were minded to grant outline planning permission tonight for the residential elements, it does not bind this authority to grant permission for 267 residential units. I say that might be what they'll come back with. That's what their transport assessment is based on. But you're being asked to consider the principles of residential development for an unspecified number at this stage. Hopefully that clarifies where we get the numbers coming in, though.
I hope that's helpful. Councillor Verdi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having this hybrid application with a full planning application for the commercial element and the outline for the residential is indeed complicating matters. However, I think we as members of the planning committee have to bear in mind that with planning applications of this nature, you know, they do have to be determined in accordance with our development plan, which has been noted, and that unless there are any material considerations, it would be very difficult to refuse. And there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. In addition, our officers have assured us that the sequential and impact tests have been applied and have been passed, if I can put it that way. And the fact that, I mean, taking on board my colleagues' comments regarding the competition and so on, the retail impact assessment, I believe, has also concluded that the arising trade diversion would not be material and would certainly not significantly be adverse, which would be would be required to trigger a refusal. So it is a complicated, I think, application, and Councillor Brennan already highlighted that if it were to, which it isn't, I know that, in front of us, we could actually approach this in a different way. But I'm minded to strongly be in favour of certainly the commercial element, because I think, you know, in terms of the information we have in front of us, there is strong evidence to agree with that. With the residential element, again, going back to Andrew Pegram's comments relating to the application in front of us, we either accept the full application or we don't accept the full application. The tilted balance principle, which has been applied here in terms of NPPF, I think again indicates that there has to be a strong case here for considering an acceptance of this application. But I just wanted to bring to, I think, my colleagues' attention that, you know, there is principal development processes which we have to adopt here, outside of the traffic implications and some of the other areas that have been raised, although again we've been reassured that the Highways Agency has actually done and carried out what was required. So I think it is a complicated application. It's going to be one way or the other, so it's going to be a difficult one, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you, between the lines, moving a recommendation there by any chance?
Yes, I mean, I think what I'm suggesting is, if I think one of the members suggested earlier, if the reserved matters could come back and if the application was presented in a slightly different way, then there would be scope to look at both elements in a slightly different manner. Because I think looking at some of the principles that we have in front of us, I would struggle to actually refuse, you know, based on the information presented. However, agreeing to the application as it is with both elements makes that more difficult.
So that's a no at the moment then?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Gray, please.
I have a question based on paragraph 174, where it says that Highways authorities previously requested a cycle connection, and it's really related to that. There is a cycle connection close to the development. It was actually something that the gentleman speaking in favour of the development picked up, that students will take the shortest route across the development to school. And I was wondering if any consideration had been given to cyclists crossing the car park and safety concerns around that had been made.
Thank you. Do we know that? Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Chairman. The reference within the report is there is the existing cycleway that runs into the end of Beadling at the moment, and there was discussions about potential connectivity into the residential elements. Highways have requested that this be dealt with through the Section 106 legal agreement, and it's matters that we're currently in discussion with the applicants regarding. Obviously, we don't have any layout plans before us for that residential element, so in terms of how it may connect through to the commercial side of things, I'm not in a position to answer that because we simply do not know at this time. In terms of cycle paths through the commercial element, their car park, we have the plans before us and they clearly don't show cycle routes through that particular part of the site, if that answers the question.
Want to come back on that?
Yes, please. And it was so with that in mind. So I say so. Safety of cyclists crossing the commercial part hasn't been considered at this stage.
I wouldn't say that it hasn't been considered. Obviously, there's the cycleway across the frontage of the site along the edge of Wilford Lane at the moment, and highway officers are not objecting on highway safety grounds with regards to cyclists. They were simply seeking to improve the connectivity of an existing cycle route rather than the cyclists having to come up Beadling along the frontage of the site, which might be less desirable. They were pushing for a connection through the site. Whether that would then be a choice for cyclists to either come down the residential access road along the frontage, or whether they would choose to cycle through the car park would be their choice.
Mr. Peckham.
Chairman, if I could just add to that, I think you've got some conflicting issues there, because clearly you want to improve the safety of cyclists, you want to steer them away from the pub and the fast food, or not it's not fast food, the coffee shop element, and you've got the safety issue of them going across the car park. I think, Chairman, you did hear the applicant say in his presentation that they were going to beef up the landscaping across the frontage of the site to dissuade cyclists going across the frontage of the site. So I think in that respect it has, if like, been picked up. I heard it mentioned in the applicant's address to the committee. They're trying to discourage cyclists across that site. At the moment, clearly, there's no access across that site anyway. So you have got that conflicting desire. You've got the highway authority saying they'd like to improve the cycle connectivity, but you've got the other issues, and that is all about the planning balance. That's where the planning balance comes in, and we have to consider pros and cons of the issues.
Okay. Now, Councillor Major, you've indicated to come back again. And so
Sorry, am I allowed to?
Yeah.
Sorry, slightly different. It kind of ties in a bit with the safeguarding issue that we've been talking about, and I would certainly be supportive of putting a condition into the planning for the ANPR in the car park. But I'm just wondering if there's also something we could do with that crossing point. Children will be walking along Beckett Way, and they will be crossing what is potentially quite a busy access point. Is there any scope there to put in some kind of, you see, I hope you see where I'm talking about, so that if they're crossing the access to the car park, then they have some sort of pedestrian right of way through that part? Is that something we're able to push for, just to make that a little bit less of a dicey?
So you're thinking of a condition, or
yeah, if that's possible.
Certainly there are a number of highway conditions shown, and these are the planning drawings rather than the technical highway drawings. They become very muddled on the screen just because of the pure level of data on there. I don't have the file in front of me. Forgive me, I can't recollect whether there is a proposed crossing at that point. It's not a traffic light controlled crossing, but I think that there may be a zebra crossing. If not, it's something we could discuss with the highway authority to see if they would be supportive of. And then we could go and discuss that with the applicants.
okay. I have two more speakers, Councillor Thomas and Councillor Bidsall. Councillor Thomas, please, both of whom are coming back.
Thank you. I understand the concerns about it being a hybrid application, but I don't share the concerns about taking it as a hybrid application at this time. We've got an overall site that's in a hugely sustainable location that's proposing both employment, business use and much needed residential. I know they're only indicative housing layouts and so on, but what they're showing is much needed apartments, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and homes for older people. I know those are only indicative and they could change at this stage, but the overall site right next to the tram stop in a sustainable location on a brownfield site has to be an attractive proposal for development. I would support, if this goes through, I would support a condition for a car park management plan. I was wanting to ask whether the Sainsbury's application, the previous application, included consideration of access to the site directly opposite, and whether that's changed in this application. I'm very concerned that trees are being lost, and particularly mature trees, and I do find it difficult to believe that they couldn't plan the restaurant pub area and keep the lime tree. And the section 106, I do see is carefully worded so that if the, or that's proposed to be worded, so that if the housing mix changes, the number of primary school places will be increased. I think there's a shortage in primary school places in general, and I do think that has to be very carefully looked at going forward to make sure there are enough primary school places for any children in these flats. I'd also say that it's quite strange that there's a contribution for a play area for these non-existent children.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thomas. I thought you were going to be coming to some sort of moving something at that one point. Am I right or am I wrong? Or? Well, just before we do you want to come back on any of those ones, please?
There's some questions there.
Yes, there were.
Yes. Yeah. In terms of the Sainsbury's access arrangements, their red line was slightly different insofar as it did include some land on the western side of Beckett Way. And I believe, forgive me, it predates my time with the authority, but my recollection and my understanding is that that was to provide parking for the parents as a pick-up and drop-off point primarily, and therefore their application did propose a mini roundabout and the formation of a small crossroads at that particular location. Clearly that's a lapsed planning application, and the red line before you tonight is for a slightly different, smaller area of the site, and we have to assess what is before us based on the evidence we have. With regard to the loss of the trees, again, it's something that officers have discussed at length with the applicants about the possibility of reconfiguring the layout. It's fair to say that it's not something that the applicants have just been simply dismissive of. They have looked at it, they've discussed it with the various potential operators. In planning terms, we're looking at the uses, but obviously from a commercial side, they're looking from an operator's perspective. And they have asked officers to determine what's before members tonight. So they've asked the authority to assess what is before them. With regards to the play space, you are quite right, and that is something that the applicants have also picked up on, and it's part of the ongoing discussions regarding the 106. But you're quite right, if that form of development were to come forward, potentially there would be less children on site, there would be less demand for play space. If any residential development were in a more traditional layout, more traditional format, the requirements would be different, and the 106 would seek to reflect those varying scenarios to capture all eventualities.
Do you want to come back on at this point? Okay. Councillor Bidsall, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to say and put my cards on the table a little bit here. I have to say I'm feeling quite uneasy about this whole application. First of all, let's just deal with the lime tree. It's a mature tree. I'm not happy that that is going to be removed. It's a protected tree. I think removing a protected tree for the purposes of building a pub doesn't sound, in my book, a wholly purposeful event. I think I heard on the radio this morning when I was driving along my car, one mature tree provides enough oxygen for 10 humans for 4 humans for 10 years. It was something along those lines. So, you know, that makes you think, doesn't it? And we're going to demolish or remove a mature tree in this application. Second thing is, I believe that there are some potential safeguarding issues. And I don't see that the safeguarding issues have been fully evaluated in this report. There are any number of variables in terms of safeguarding and the nearby school and the implications of a pub and a car park and all the rest of it and the traffic. I don't see any evaluation of that. And to me, and that's what safeguarding is about, doing a risk assessment, assessing those issues and putting in place mitigating or preventing circumstances to prevent any undesired events. So I'm uneasy about that. I'm also uneasy about the effect of the outline application on Bede Ling. There doesn't appear, unless I've missed it, there doesn't appear to be any analysis in the report on the effect of Bede Ling and the proposal of the outline application. And I've heard from the representation, the speaker in the Bede Ling area. So, you know, there's a number of issues. And then the final issue here is, and they're all equally as important to me, but the final issue that I'm uncomfortable with is the dual nature of this application, this hybrid application. We're all uneasy. It's all coming across. We're all uneasy and sort of balancing the scales. Which one shall we go for? I really don't feel that the application should have been brought before us in this way, because it's creating so much debate. We've spent a lot of time on this. That demonstrates the fact that the nature of this application, with it being a hybrid, isn't a straightforward decision. There are many unanswered questions, and many uneasy points that I've just made keep coming back and back into my mind. So, I'm also uneasy, Mr. Chairman, and I have to say this, and you're not going to like it, but I'm also uneasy at the fact that you've twice now, you know what I'm going to say perhaps, twice encouraged speakers to accept the proposal or make a proposal to accept it. Now, I'm uneasy that you've done that as well.
Well, no, I haven't. I said, are you making a proposal? I wasn't asking anyone to propose in favour or against. So I don't agree with what you
okay, well, I just make the comment.
I was jumping to I was assuming that the tone of your voice, you were about to make a recommendation either way, but as it happens, you didn't. So we're still away from that.
So that's where I'm at the moment, and I'd just like to hear what other members would have to say.
Well, most other members have spoken, but Councillor Purdue-Horan has indicated to speak. Would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along with other councillors, I am struggling with this particular application. I fully acknowledge the efforts that the developer has gone to engage with the local community, but I am concerned, and I've listened very carefully to what's been said at the table, and I particularly listened very carefully to the ward member, who over a number of years now has come to this committee to raise concerns about development along Wilford Lane. And it is absolutely right that this committee is provided with robust information from the experts, such as Highways and others, so that we can make a decision in confidence. I'm not absolutely confident that we are at the right time for an application to be submitted for this particular site on this particular proposal. I think that there may be some tweakings. I suspect, rather like King Canute, if we continue to dig in over a longer period, we may fail anyway. But I would like some more robust information from highways, because if I've read page 135 correctly, paragraph 11, and I do accept that in terms of residential development, we're only talking about outline, but in my experience, we've always roughly spoken about the number of dwellings in previous outline applications. It suggests that there could be a total of 204, but in actual fact, there is a fifth multi-storey apartment which could bring it up to 267. That's a significant increase. The Highways Department of Nottinghamshire County Council appear to have done modelling based on 204 residential developments. And it's that, and it was that modelling that allowed Highways to withdraw their holding objection. And frankly, I'm not comfortable with that. I would like further discussions and further information to be brought back to this committee with a proposal that we can be confident of going forward with. Because, as other councillors have said, this particular area along Wilford Lane is an extremely sensitive area. And as Councillor Murray alluded to, the traffic there is very heavy. And I would like it to be more robust, specifically because, of course, as we are well aware, there are hundreds of pupils in the local school. And, of course, there's also the impact on the local community. I do agree it is probably a sustainable site, and I accept it's a brownfield site, but we are looking at probably quite a sensitive area on Wilford Lane that I'm just not comfortable with, and I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, I cannot support the recommendation in the papers before us this evening.
Thank you. Well, it is a huge application and it is very complicated and there are lots of concerns. Right, I think we've got to make a decision. I mean, we can't, you're not allowed to, or can you just help us out on the technicalities?
Chairman, yes. I think what I was hearing from Councillor Purdue-Horan, and I've heard it from a number of members on the committee, is that they're uneasy because they don't have enough information about the outline element of this proposal. Chairman, the applicant is entitled to submit the application in whatever form they deem it. Providing it satisfies national validation requirements, we have a legal duty to determine their planning application based on the information presented with that application.
Just correct Mr. Pegram's understanding of my point. I accept we don't know and we can't determine how many residential units will eventually come. The traffic modelling, as I understand it, has been based on 204 dwellings, but there is mention of 267 dwellings. I think this committee, and Councillor Beardsall has also alluded to this, that we want much more robust information that we can be confident of, and I'm not confident of it at the moment.
Well said. So if we're not confident and we're concerned what we have in front of us at the moment, we make a decision based on that opinion. And there's a recommendation in the report to approve. Someone may wish to put an alternative recommendation in. So, Councillor Thomas.
I'd like to recommend to propose that we approve the application and follow the officer's recommendation with two additional areas to be included in conditions. One is the car park management plan for both the commercial and the residential parts of the site, and the other is consideration of pedestrian flows for the school and cycle flows for the school to ensure that the children are safe. And with those two pieces of work, I would be willing to approve the application.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Major, thank you. Well, we have a recommendation moved and seconded. Does anyone else wish to speak on this? Councillor Bizzle?
Yeah, I'd like to speak on the reasons why we reject this.
Well,
but
no,
that's
no, no.
probably
Before,
going to come next,
before we do that, we have to take a vote now. It's
Right.
been moved and seconded appropriately.
If that
Right. Let's go to a show. Right. Show of hands time. Those in favour of the motion as moved and seconded as per the report, please show.
Three, four, Chairman.
And those against?
Seven against, Chairman.
So, sorry.
Now need an alternative.
Do we have any abstentions? And one abstention. So now I need an alternative motion, please, for refusal. Councillor Beadsall.
Right, I would like to propose that we refuse the application on the basis that the impact of the mature tree being removed is not acceptable, that there is too much, there's not enough information with regard to the number of dwellings and the traffic impact, 267, 204, it all seems a bit of a mix-up. I alluded to that earlier. And also that there's no real detailed information of the impact of the outline application on Bede, is it Bede Way? Beedling. For those three reasons, I'd like to move that we reject the application.
Have we got that down?
Yeah.
Have we got that? Do you have a seconder for that proposal, please? Councillor Murray. Right. Mr. Pegram, you're going to tell us something.
I am, Chairman, yes. Chairman, as your officer, it is my duty to advise you on the robustness of your reasons for refusal. It's not, I don't want the members of the public to think this is me trying to sway you away from a decision to refuse planning. No, Chairman,
no, I'm
Chairman,
sorry.
I think the
No.
members have spoken without being interrupted. I
Please.
think it's only fair.
Don't. Mr. Pegram.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, my duty is to advise you of the robustness of your reasons for refusal and whether they would meet the necessary tests and requirements of the legislation. Clearly, the impact on the mature tree is a material planning consideration and can amount to a reason for refusal. What I would ask members to obviously consider in that is you have to balance that against all the other issues. So the applicant has told you they're planting 112 trees. There is the loss of a very mature tree, and your officers accept that that is regrettable. But it is a valid reason for refusal if members consider that that tree is so significant to the character of the area. You cannot refuse an application on the basis that it does not contain enough information. That wouldn't be a justifiable reason. You'd have to demonstrate what that lack of information resulted in. If members are not content with the information on highway issues, and I would praise this by saying highways have considered it, they don't object, a reason based on not enough information would not be a justified or sound reason for refusal. Alternative would be that it's not been adequately demonstrated that. However, as I say, that comes with the caution that they did do a transport assessment, they did do the modelling, and that has been accepted by the Highway Authority. On the third reason for refusal, as I read it, there's three, impact on Beedling. Again, no, we don't know what the impact is. That impact would be considered at the reserve matters stage, and if the details that came forward at reserve matters stage, for instance, resulted in overbearing, overshadowing, overlooking impacts, they would be reasons to refuse those details. I'm uneasy with a reason for refusal about the impact on Beedling when we don't know what those details are. So out of the three, Chairman, you've got one, which I accept is a valid reason for refusal with that cautionary note about balance. Second one, not enough information, no, but if you wanted it on not been adequately demonstrated, that is a potential avenue. but again with the cautionary tone that they did provide a transport assessment and that was assessed by the Highway Authority. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. So we need.
So, yeah, if I could come back,
Yeah.
you know, it's terminologies really, isn't it? And not
It's
adequately
terminology and
demonstrated.
legalities as well.
Yes, yes, it's terminology. So I would go along with the second point to be changed to not adequately demonstrated on the transport side of things. And I still feel the same thing. It's not adequately demonstrated that the impact on Beedling of the outline application.
Be a bit more specific there. So.
Chairman, just to remind the committee, you did consider an application 1 or 2 cycles ago for pure outline for a development site with no details presented. You had no specified numbers, so it's a bit of an inconsistent approach to adopt to say you want the details to assess the impact when, again, as I say, you don't know what that impact is.
But
my advice to you, Chairman, is I would stick with the first 2. The third one is a little bit of a make-weight that doesn't really assist you.
Do you take that comment on board?
I was just
advice
going to make the comment that we're quite often also reminded that each application is looked at on its own merits. So it just seems to be one or the other, depending on what the application is.
So just to confirm, then, are you keeping that point in or taking it out? You are keeping it in.
We check with the seconder, Chairman.
Yes. Now, the seconder was Councillor Murray. Are you happy with those, the recommendation and the reasons? Yeah. Okay. Are we all clear? It all gets very complicated. So we need to take another vote now, and this is a vote on the new recommendation, which is to refuse permission for the reasons we've just heard. Do we need to read them out again, or are we all clear as to why recommendation refusal has been recommended? Right. Show of hands then, please, in favour of this new revised recommendation. Please show. 7. Any against? 3. Any abstentions?
Yep.
Oh, 1 abstention. So can we confirm the numbers?
7 for, 3 against, 1 abstention.
So that's 7 for that recommendation, 3 against the recommendation and 1 abstention. So that ultimately means that the permission is refused. Okay, thank you. Can I just ask colleagues and visitors, please do not question the integrity of, in particular, officers. They are doing their job. They have to advise the committee on legalities and what is a very complicated world. And I don't want to hear any accusations or whatever that might have been implemented by some of the calls I heard. I hope you understand that. It's a very difficult decision. Planning, whether it's a big application like this or a house extension, will always be controversial for one way or another. Some people will be happy with the result, some people won't be. That's life. But please, I don't want people accusing or implying that there's any impropriety or favouritism or whatever being shown, because please be assured it's not. You only have to see the detail of the report, the depth of discussion we've had tonight. So I hope you understand. I've just felt the need to say that because it's very, very important. It's very important matters we're dealing with. Now, we'll take a short break now. It's getting hot and uncomfy. Can we come back at 9 o'clock, please? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's gone 9 o'clock. Thank you for your patience. I hope you'll understand when you've been sitting here for 2.5 hours, it gets a little bit, you find yourself stiffening up and your brain goes a bit. Plus the fact, was it me, but it was getting very hot as well. And that wasn't just the people speaking hot, it was the room and temperature. But anyway, we're back. And so we'll go on to our next application now, which I've just got to find the right page. So this is the Wharf building at Wharf House, Main Street, Hickling. Proposed change of use for the mooring of canal boats for holiday lets, additional seating in connection with an existing tea room, including additional parking. Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, there was a late representation schedule circulated to you yesterday afternoon. I'm also aware, clearly we only present to you, for your information, we only present to you as late reps what are submitted directly to the council. I am aware that members of the committee may have also received a number of emails and representations direct from residents. So clearly, if there are any issues or comments that need clarifying on that, by all means raise them through the consideration of the application. The application, Chairman, relates to the canal basin in Hickling. It's at the northern end of the village, within the conservation area, and the principal building on the site, which is this one here I'm circling, is the old wharf building, which is a listed building. So there are clearly statutory tests that you must have regard to in the consideration of this application. The site access is down in the bottom southwest corner of the site here. Just to explain, obviously the green bit is the land part, the blue area is the extent of the basin, and this area is obviously the former canal, or it is a canal. It's referred to as a remaining canal because it's not navigable by boats, or certainly it doesn't go beyond the extent of the bits that still hold water. That's the aerial photograph, again showing the wharf building. That building has had permission previously granted for a tea room and cycle repair shop. The tea room element of that has been implemented. Subsequently, they came back and they asked for an extension to the tea room, effectively going into the cycle repair shop element. There's the Plough pub on the opposite side of the road, and there's the Fawkes haulage yard on the to the south of the site. So this is looking southerly down Main Street towards the application site. You can just pick out the buildings creeping into the picture, and this is effectively the hump in the road is where the road goes over the canal. Moving more closely in, you can now see the wharf building which sits there. The canal obviously at this point here. Closer in still, and you now get the benefit of the views of the canal and the basin here. And then looking across the basin towards the listed building. Now standing effectively at the northwestern corner of the basin, looking down the Grantham Canal here. The wharf building that you saw was over to the right, just out of shot here, and the canal towpath, which is much used and loved public right of way. Looking southerly directly across the basin, picking up the wharf building, and again moving along the towpath, looking in a generally southwesterly direction, again across the basin, the Plough pub opposite, and the wharf building on the left. And again moving a little bit further along that towpath, just to give you a feel for the views across the basin. That's now stood to the southwest of the site, looking across, so you can see the access into the site with the wharf building. Can't see the water at this point, but the basin sits in that area there. And then again, looking down Main Street, the basin is over the left-hand shoulder of the photographer in this shot. Looking more closely into the site, that's the access into the site with the car parking, tea room in the wharf building, and obviously tables and chair seating. And then at the rear of the building, looking again from effectively southeastern corner across at the site and the basin in the background. Excuse the skew with angle of the photograph. I thought it was easier to straighten it up than members have to turn their heads. But that's looking northerly. Car park on the right, Main Street on the left, and with the basin in the foreground there. So, Chairman, the application which is before you this evening is a change of use application. Effectively, arguably two elements to it. The proposal is for, well, actually three, I would argue. The proposal is for the mooring of 3 narrowboats for use as short-term holiday lets. The mooring of a wide beam barge or boat for additional seating for the cafeteria area, and then the third element is really the additional 4 parking spaces created to serve the development. And that plan, Chairman, was just submitted to show that it wouldn't result in the loss of these 4 parking spaces, but when there was a need for servicing on the site by large vehicles, that's been tracked to show that a larger vehicle can access the site and obviously turn on site. Chairman, you have in your late reps some representations from one of the residents. Included with that representation were these photographs. Clearly the point being made in the written text was about the parking on the high street, traffic generation and traffic congestion, and clearly these photographs were submitted as part of that. Rather than circulate them as part of the late reps, I thought it was probably better to display them on the screen as we are now, but effectively showing the situation on a weekend of the 8th of May, not a school holiday, not a bank holiday, picturing the cars parked on the highway. Another one, typical occurrence at weekends, showing the car parking on the highway on the main street. And another one, 17th of April, again making the point it's midweek, not school holidays, not bank holiday. And one across the, I think the purpose of this one, Chairman, was effectively to show that the car park is generally full when the cafe is in use already. I'll leave that one there, Chairman, because that one is one that the Ward Councillor has asked me to include on the presentation, so no doubt we'll come back to that one. Chairman, the application is for tourist accommodation and commercial activity. Clearly, your officers have considered it carefully in light of policy. Clearly, there are policies in our own plans and in the NPPF that support rural tourism, rural economic growth, activities that support the rural economy. This is viewed as one. It's effectively almost a diversification, if you like, to the cafe use on the site. Clearly, Chairman, as I said at the beginning, two critical issues that you must consider are Section 66 and Section 72 of the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act. Section 66 requires that we give special regard to the desirability for protecting listed buildings effectively and their settings. So I did say I'd leave that there, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So obviously you've seen that the wharf building itself is a listed building. The basin to Hickling Basin is part of the setting of that listed building. Clearly there's no direct impact on the fabric of the listed building, but as I say, we do have a duty to consider the impact on the setting. If you consider that there is any harm, whether that's less than substantial or substantial harm, then clearly you have to weigh the public benefits of the scheme against that harm. Your conservation officer has concluded that it would cause no harm to the setting of the listed building. The other test is, statutory requirement, I should say, is in relation to the conservation area. And again, Section 72 requires that you as decision makers give special regard to the desirability for preserving or enhancing the special appearance and character of the conservation area. We are in a conservation area. The conservation area appraisal does include important views across the basin. It does also include the parts of the site as positive open spaces. So you must consider as decision makers the impact on the special character and appearance of that area. Again, if you deem that there is any harm, whether it's less than substantial or substantial, you must then weigh the public benefits against that harm. Again, Chairman, your conservation officer has deemed that it would cause no harm. The other aspect, Chairman, amongst other things that I will touch on that's been raised in all the representations that we've received is the traffic situation. And arguably, Hickling is a victim of its own success. It is a very attractive area. It does attract a lot of people, and that results in, as you've seen, parking on Main Street a lot of the time. However, Chairman, we must consider this application against the County Council's guidelines for parking. The scheme satisfies the County Council's parking guidelines. If it didn't, and there was arguably a displacement of vehicles onto the highway exacerbating the parking situation, that could be a valid consideration in the determination of this application. It is still a valid consideration, I would add, but it might give rise to a potential reason for refusal. However, Chairman, the scheme has been considered by the Highway Authority. It does satisfy their guidelines and therefore, in our opinion, that's not a justifiable reason to refuse permission. Ultimately, Chairman, it has been looked at very carefully by your officers. We're satisfied with the proposed use. It's considered to be acceptable in principle, and the visual impacts of the development, both in terms of the listed building, conservation area, and the area in general, are considered acceptable. And the other aspect, Chairman, obviously is impact on amenities of residents. And again, there is deemed to be no reason to withhold permission on those grounds. On that basis, Chairman, the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. So we have some public speakers on this item as well. We have two speakers. First of all, speaking on behalf of the Parish Council and residents of Hickling who are objecting is Mr. Clark. It's very warm in here. I've tried turning the air conditioning down. I think it's better than it was, but it's not ideal. So as soon as you're ready, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'll make clear right at the very beginning, I speak only as a resident on behalf of the Parish Council and a large proportion of the residents of Hickling, and not in any other capacity. This change of use of the canal basin is to the detriment of the tranquillity of rural village life. The residents accept with varying degrees of reluctance the need to support the rural economy, but not at any cost. There has to be a balance. This proposal greatly alters that balance, which will adversely affect everyday life for the local residents. The canal, which is now a remainder waterway, was originally conceived for working boats. One day the canal will be restored to working capacity again. Indeed, the Grantham Canal Society are already proposing extending their current trip boats from Woolsthorpe to Hickling Basin. This change of use proposal tonight to use floating holiday lets does not involve working boats. They have no engines. They are static hulls. What is the difference between static floating holiday lets and cabins on the bankside, which would surely be refused? The canal basin is meant for short-term mooring, for offloading and loading, and not for permanent mooring of boats without engines that would impede future working boats. Parking is already a nightmare in this area of Hickling. The wharf car park is already regularly full, as Mr. Pegram did comment on, using the spaces designated under previous permissions, with continuous parking also along the main stretch of the road outside. Residents question the accuracy and scaling of the spaces shown, as there simply isn't enough room. The comments and requirements of the Highway Authority are wholly inadequate. They require 3 spaces for the boats, plus 11 spaces for the T-barge. But there are only 13 spaces available now, in accordance with previous requirements which already serve the existing use. Only 4 new spaces are proposed, so that later or new provision of 17 spaces falls well short of the total of 27 that will be required to satisfy the Highway Authority's both proposed and current use. It appears car parking spaces may have been counted twice. This, in addition to the other extra traffic generated. HGV tanker movements will be required to enter the premises in conflict with the public in order to empty sewerage. There will be also other associated deliveries by van or HGV. The suggestion that these movements should be outside normal working hours will not contribute to tranquillity for the residents or boat occupants. By definition, the increase in customers to the Barge Extension Cafe would result in an unacceptable level of traffic on a road not designed for this volume. Residents are especially concerned at the potential noise and nuisance that will result from the proposal. Holidaymakers are there to enjoy themselves, quite rightly. This is bound to include late night drinking, making friends with the neighbouring occupants, resulting in sitting outside, opening another bottle, which will naturally raise the voices, not to mention when they decide to play music to accompany their enjoyment. The open water will carry the noise considerable distance. Caravans on land have to be spaced 6 metres apart in case of fire. These are caravans on the water and are shown as being moored adjacent to each other, creating a risk of fire transferring to the adjacent boat. They are not storage mooring, they are holiday lets with people in them. There have been 114 objections from residents, about 25% of the population, which provides all the evidence you need of concerns regarding this proposal. The residents suggest that permission for a change of use should be refused because it would result in permanently moored hulls impeding future working boats, environmental damage from litter and pollution affecting water quality, further erosion of what green space is left, unacceptable increase in traffic through a village street not designed for such levels, insufficient on-street parking provision which is unable to meet the new capacity over and above the existing requirements, which exacerbates parking onto the road. Unacceptable and unrestricted late night noise and disturbance incurred by local residents by the very nature of the holiday accommodation. Residents do not support the rural requirement. Please do not inflict further parking, traffic and noise on Hickling residents.
5 minutes is up. Thank you. We have another speaker on this. This is the ward member, Councillor Cumberlack, please. Mr. Peregrine and I are just muttering to each other that we're not used to people clapping, and that people never clap for Mr. Peregrine. Right, Councillor Cumberlack, up to 5 minutes, please.
It appears a very romantic notion returning barges to the canal and basin. Opening the canal to navigation would be welcomed. A £400,000 land grant has been obtained for Hose to Hickling section. It would be hampered by static holiday lets. The basin is a winding hole for turning barges, not a marina for mooring. This application is about changing the canal use from tranquil remainder waterway into a holiday let tourist destination on the Hickling Basin, an area defined as a non-designated heritage asset, having a positive impact in the conservation area appraisal. Were the application to build holiday cabins on green fields by the canal, as application 1602454, it would be refused. What is the difference? Green field or green waterway? This is an application to build. The wharf area around the building is seen by many as our village green, which is the heart of the community, historically used for village events, nativity, maypole dancing, fireworks and scarecrows. Conservation Officer, Para 18, refers to 4 holiday lets, also Para 87 and 97. Is it 3 or 4? Refers to the wharf surrounding historically being hard standing, and therefore the destruction of the grassed area for parking, not harming the appearance of the conservation area. The original hard standing was back in 1797. I remember it well. Since the closure of the canal in 1936, Nature's reclaimed it as a green area. This proposal would harm the wharf building, impact the conservation area and ecology. Pollution, environmental, noise and light would affect the animals and community alike. The holiday let operation will be 24/7 with no regulation after 4 p.m. Who will police the area? Local residents? This is a quiet, tranquil spot. At night time you hear the wildlife. Even the fishermen quietly talking are heard along the street. Noise travels. The basin and canal are not moving waterways. Water is not circulated and cleansed, so residue from swabbing decks will pollute the water. Bottles and associated detritus will remain polluting the water. Otter have been seen returning, but the Eco report says high levels of disturbance will drive them away. This is counter to Canal and River Trust's TV promotion of the rewilding canals. NPPF Section 15 says permission be refused if there is harm to biodiversity and development that does not contribute and enhance natural local landscape. Policy 16 and 17 endorses need to protect such areas. The Canal and Rivers Trust contradicts their own values. They have a prejudicial interest. They will get substantial licence fees. Holiday lets will increase strain on village parking. Many cottages directly face the street with no driveways. The wharf is far too small for expanding operation. Additional parking spaces will encroach onto community table tennis site, requiring 4.4 by 8 metres according to Sport England, immediately abut the T-deck and hamper the unauthorised store cabin. The only vehicles able to manoeuvre into the 2 corner spaces will be smart cars, not 4x4 family cars. Parking is already inadequate, leading to a non-material amendment early last year for 4 extra spaces. Extended tea room further increased demand. 4 more spaces for the holiday lets and new T-barge will lead to even more on-street parking. An impact on the road network warranting refusal, as at Section 9 of the NPPF. Increasing the rural economy is commendable in accord with Section 6 of the NPPF, but not at expense of existing economy. Private road access to the wharf is shared with a plant hire company with articulated low loaders, 18-wheel tippers negotiating parked cars. This business, as you saw, uses unauthorised cones to keep the road clear of parked cars in order to operate. Photo shows delayed vehicle. The physiotherapist opposite needs roadside parking for patients. New landlord at the pub asks how he stops cars parking opposite for brewery lorries and trade refuse. This is a farming village with farms all along Main Street. At least 3 farms have fields on the opposite canal bank and regularly, many times a day at harvest, negotiate large machinery between parked cars. Para 41 gives regard to the emerging neighbourhood plan, and Paras 73 and 74 outline protection for the Tranquil Canal and Basin. Tourism. This is not the right place for all reasons outlined. The site and village are too small, the impact too great. It is not right. A change of use application is in effect a full application. Requirements of full application are not met. It's alarming to read a Para 84 grant would allow for unconsulted amendments. Consider the impact on this application on very close neighbours, businesses, small village and existing canal. Thank you.
Thank you. So we heard from Mr. Clark and Councillor Cumberlack, who are both against the application for reasons of contravening tranquility, concerns about the impact on wildlife and the environment as a whole, considerable comments and concerns about car parking, and also noise nuisance, worried about late night noise, bottles, drinking, and so on. And compared to being static caravans or cabins as opposed to being boats, what's the difference? I think that's covered most points. Can we come back on that, please? All those, please.
Chairman, I don't want to comment on every point that was made, just a couple of points. I think Councillor Clark Mr. Clark, I should say, yes, and Councillor Cumberlack made the point that that this would impede the use of the basin for working boats. Chairman, the canal and the basin, I think, was constructed around the mid-1700s when we transported everything by canal boats, and clearly at that time, I'm sure it was a very thriving operation bringing stuff into and out of the basin. However, times have moved on. I doubt very much that we will return to a situation of transporting goods by the canal. So I don't think, Chairman, that's a valid consideration, or certainly one that should be given any significant weight. It is a non-designated heritage asset, quite correct, and we have to consider the impact on that. It's not the same as designated heritage assets. It doesn't have the same status and it doesn't carry the statutory tests, but nevertheless we do still have to, under the policies of the NPF, can consider the impact on a non-designated heritage asset. Reference has been made, Chairman, I think in emails that were circulated directly to members, and also Councillor Cumberlack referred to the refusal of holiday units, reference 16-02454. That application related to, where is it now, Grove Farm, Hickling Lane, Kinalton. However, Chairman, just for clarity, those holiday units in that instance were not refused. The application was originally submitted for 6 holiday units, I think it was, and also the extension of the existing toilet block and retention of the site of an existing log cabin for retail goods. Unfortunately, that application was deficient in information with regard to the appearance and the size of those log cabins, and rather than provide that information, the applicant chose to withdraw that element from the application. The application was refused, but it was refused on the basis of the fact that the retail element was unrelated to the use on the site and therefore inappropriate. So, having said that, Chairman, clearly each case is considered on its merits. Before the question is raised, Chairman, we don't have details of the barges, so is that not the same case? I think it's a little bit different. Clearly, we didn't have sufficient details of the size, appearance, height of the log cabins. To a certain extent, narrow boats differ very little in terms of their general form, shape and height. but there is a condition recommended as part of the recommendation that the details of the final details of the barges, colour, appearance, etc., should be submitted before they are moved into the basin. The other issue is, Chairman, clearly the barges could potentially be replaced over time if there was a need to replace them if they for maintenance reasons. The Canal and River Trust have commented on this application, Chairman. They do not object. I'll leave it at that for now. And one further point I must to raise, Chairman, is you have in your late representation schedule the detailed calculations for the parking requirements for the sites. Councillor Clark referred to the fact that there was a requirement for, I think, 11 for the T-barge. The details are on page 14 of your late representation schedule, and that does set out that it is actually the proposed floor space of the barge, 42.5 square metres, and the existing floor space of the tea room, which gives a total floor space of 152.5 square metres. If you apply the County Council's requirement for A3 uses on that floor space, it gives a requirement for 10.9, rounded up to 11 spaces. So I think there's proposal would be a total of 17 on site. There would actually be, in terms of the County Council's guidelines, an over provision. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Mr. Pegram. Please. Right, we're opening it up to discussion, please. Councillor Thomas was the first hand I saw. Thank you.
I'd like to ask about the definition short-term holiday let. My concern is that if we were looking at this application for permanent houseboats, with long-term residents, so if they're long-term residential let, shall we say, it would be a very different case, really, because the linkage with the tourism and so on has been made. What my question is, what is to stop these short-term holiday lets becoming, by osmosis over a period of time, longer-term residential lets? And are any extra conditions needed, would they be needed if this was approved, in order to stop that happening? For instance, concerning the length of each individual let, or concerning the overall number of weeks in a year that the units could be let. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. So a question about the definition of short-term versus long-term, and is there any protection against sort of long-term use?
Chairman, I'm not aware of in this context, a definition of short-term holiday let. Condition 3 does say that the permission shall be limited for the siting of 3 number narrow boats for use as short-term holiday lets. This is a subject, Chairman, and having worked in a tourist area previously, this is a subject which has caused planning authorities and inspectors a great deal of consideration. There are various mechanisms you can use to restrict it to holiday use. You could have simply a condition that says they shall only be used for holiday use. There is also a condition recommended about a site management plan, which includes a booking register system, and clearly one mechanism is that we can request to inspect the register at any time to determine who has been staying on the boats and how long for. As I say, there are various mechanisms, including things like shall not be occupied for more than 42 weeks of the year and 2 weeks at Christmas, or there are conditions which specify that the accommodation should not be occupied by any person or group of persons for a period exceeding specified period. If that is a concern of members, then clearly that is an additional condition which we could consider in order to provide more teeth, if you like, to any enforcement situation should we turn up and find that someone is living on the boats. Yes, there would be different considerations for residential moorings at this site, and I think the recommendation reflects the fact that these are proposed for rural tourism, supporting the rural economy. So again, if members are concerned about that particular aspect, then that's something that you can seek to control further through a condition of the nature I've referred to.
Okay, thank you. Does that help? Okay. Councillor, I can't see his name. Sorry, Councillor Major.
Chairman, I'm fully supportive of kind of the rural economy and supporting the diversification of that area. And I think reading through lots of the comments and lots of the objections that we've had, I think it seems to be more of a focus on the holiday let side of things as opposed to the car parking situation and sort of the mooring of the boat for additional seating. So from my perspective, and I don't have a question, this is just kind of me thinking about the proposal. I think arguably the car parking situation could be a positive. I think some of the comments refer to it's an untidy car park at the moment, so I think that would be useful to kind of think about that. I don't think it's going to cause any improvements or potentially any detriment to the current situation on the main street. It seems like that's an issue in the village, and that's potentially going to be an ongoing one, that whether or not you have additional seating in the tea rooms, I don't think that's particularly going to have a dramatic impact in either direction from my perspective. I think where I am struggling is I do feel the holiday lets would change the nature of this area. The idea that there are people present at all times, I think would have a negative impact on this locale. I don't have issue with the additional seating or the parking, but I do think that the holiday lets would be a little bit too far in terms of the development of this area, and I don't think would bring the benefits to the rural economy that would offset the negative impact on the local village.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask a point of clarification? The change of use is restricted to 4 boats, is that correct?
It's 3 narrow boats plus a wide beam.
Once that change of use has been established, presumably it's much more difficult to argue against that precedent if then the guy that's delivering this, the guy that's the owner, wishes to then bring more capacity. Presumably once that precedent has been set, that makes it much easier for him to then expand his operation.
I think there's a danger of speculating what might happen because we don't know, and if permission was to be given for what's been applied for tonight, what you're worried about is if perhaps in the future he says he wants to have some more and whatever, the applicant would have to put another application, I think, wouldn't they? They have to start a fresh application. So, am I right on that?
Sorry.
You,
maybe the condition.
Chairman, yeah, I think Mr. Norman and I were thinking along the same lines.
Right, okay.
If not, I'm sure he'll tell me. Condition 3 limits it to 3 number narrow boats and 1 wide beam boat for the seating area. So yes, if they wanted to put more boats into the basin, they would have to apply to vary that condition. And clearly, it doesn't. That's a more intensive use, arguably. Different impacts. Yes, we could reconsider that, and we might deem it that no, this is the limit. Just to clarify a point, and I think it was made by Mr. Clark, there was a query about the number of boats in the comments. Or Councillor Cumberlack may have made the point, but there was a previous application to this for 4 narrow boats and a wide beam boat. That was deemed, because of number and layout, to be unacceptable, and this is a resubmission seeking to overcome those concerns that were raised. So it is, just to clarify, for 3 holiday let narrow boats and one wide beam boat.
Is that clear? Is that helpful? Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs. Stockwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I study every application, but I admit to really studying this one in depth and really going over it. There are items in the application that it's difficult to disagree and uphold decisions that are made by, such as the Highways Department. We would have trouble opposing that. So I propose to concentrate on subjective matters. Hickling has become an environmentally friendly, delightful area and is rightly very popular. Coping with the peak weekends and holiday times is difficult for the area to accommodate, and I know from many personal visits to the village that such a small hamlet struggles to fully cope with the influx of visitors. I conclude that the area is at maximum capacity now, and further development would have a detrimental impact on the local inhabitants of a small settlement. I am not convinced by the argument that the
environment is not harmed by further development, or that it will not have a detrimental impact on the enjoyment of the local inhabitants of what is supposed to be a tranquil rural area. I've listened to comments tonight. I agree that there are inadequate parking spaces. The impact on there will be impact on the conservation area, and there will be overuse of a listed building. So I move a motion to refuse this application on the grounds of increased harm to the environment, and that further development will lead to detrimental impact on the village life and village scene. And for those 5 reasons, I look for a seconder, please.
Yes. Could you just repeat those reasons? The
Right.
second batch of 4, because we have to write them down.
Right.
Please.
Increased harm to the environment, and that further development will have a detrimental impact on the village life and the village scene. Inadequate parking is proven now in my eyes. The impact on the conservation area and the impact on a listed building in its setting.
Have you got those?
I've got those, Chairman. Can I just clarify impact? Which way do you mean? Adverse impact?
Detrimental, sorry.
Impact.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, it needs to be put in the motion, I think. Conservation area and the listed building. That's the Wharf building, isn't it?
Okay, got those? Right, so we have a recommendation moved by Councillor Stockwood to refuse permission for the reasons given. Do you have a seconder for that recommendation, please? So Councillor Brennan is seconding that. Do you want to add anything to that? Do you want to make any comments at this stage? Okay, thank you. Right, well, we've got a recommendation moved here and seconded. Who else would like to? Does anyone else wish to speak on the matter? Councillor Bidsall.
Yeah, just one question, just for clarification purposes. The supply of electricity to the fixed boats, barges, is that going to be from the grid, or are they going to have their own generator nearby? And I was worried if they have got a generator, what the impact of noise would be.
Chairman, the report sets out that the proposal is to connect them to the mains through plugs, and there's a condition recommended that requires the final details of those that infrastructure to be submitted. There is a condition again that also that says no propulsion or engines to be on the boat, and I'll classify that as including generators.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this? Did you want to say?
Yeah, well,
oh, it's Commissioner Norman, sorry, yes.
Yes, can I just remind members, in terms of rightly referred you to the advice in the report. Perhaps we can just identify its paragraphs 44 and 77. You must first of all consider whether you consider there is adverse impact, detrimental impact, in both the case of the listed building and the conservation area. If in your minds you think there is, then the statute, and it's there on paragraph 44 and 45, says that you must give either special regard, special attention to that. So effectively you've got to give it extra weight if there is harm. And then the balance of the public benefits outweighing that. So you must start, if you like, at a different level. If you consider there's harm, then special regard must be given to that harm and special attention to that harm before you then go on to consider whether there's outstanding benefits that would outweigh that. Mr. Pegram, I'm sure, will support that.
So you really have to be clear as to what the...
You must weigh it in your mind.
Yes,
That's right.
okay.
And give it, it's not just an ordinary weighing exercise. Special regard must be given if you find there is harm.
Special regard, Mr. Pegram.
Not a great deal to add to what Mr. Norman has said, but clearly, in terms of all of the reasons for refusal, with the exception of inadequate car parking, which is an obvious one, I'm just, bear with me, Sharon, I'll just try and note them down again as well. The reasons for refusal are increased harm to environment, further detrimental impact on village life and scene, the inadequate car parking one, which doesn't require any further clarification. Taking those first two, though, Chairman, if officers are to attempt to defend those reasons for refusal, I would need clear indication of what that harm is in order that we could then consider what the objective evidence to support those reasons for refusal are. The other one relates to the impact on the setting of the listed building and impact on the setting of the conservation area. Again, I would need clear indication as to what that harm is, what constitutes the harm to enable us to potentially come up with objective evidence to defend those reasons. Thank you, Chairman.
So the point here is if permission was refused tonight, it's possible, doesn't always happen, if it's possible it might go to an appeal situation. So basically we're saying you have to be very clear as to what the reasons for refusal are. So do you want to elaborate on, add anything?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very concerned about the conservation area. It's a tranquil scene at the moment, which is uninterrupted of necessity by the number of visitors that are visiting now. And there's the potential with this for it to be increased. So it really will have a detrimental impact on this area. And I feel very strongly about that, and I am content that that is a good enough reason that if it went to appeal, an inspector would conclude that that is the case.
Chairman, sorry, just to be clear, I'm not challenging Councillor Stockwood on the validity of the reason. I'm just asking for clarity as to what those impacts are. Clearly, special character of the conservation area can include tranquility, yes.
Sorry.
Difficulty to a certain extent is that there's a pub opposite and there's also already acknowledged to be a high degree of activity in the area. But Councillor Stockwood is quite right. Tranquility forms part of the special character of that area. So it's just, as I say, not challenging her reasons for refusal per se, but in order to assist officers in defending those reasons, it's understanding what those impacts are. That one I'm fine with.
Yes.
That one's fine.
Right.
We need to just move on to the other.
Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Perhaps if it may be helpful, I don't know, paragraph 52 brings to attention section 15, I presume, of the MPPF, is it?
Yeah.
Conserving and enhancing the natural environment states that planning decisions should inter alia contribute to and enhance the natural and local landscape by protecting and enhancing valued landscape sites of biodiversity or geological value and soils in a manner commensurate with their statutory status, blah, blah, blah. Paragraph 175 goes on to state that when determining planning applications, authorities should apply the principles set out into the policy Part A, of which states that if significant harm to biodiversity as a result of development cannot be avoided, mitigated or compensated, then permission should be refused. And I think it has been touched on that it is a wildlife area and wildlife has been introduced to the area and we don't want that to be harmed if we can avoid it. Would that be relevant?
Chairman, that would certainly be relevant. However, the application was accompanied by an ecological report that was considered by your sustainability officer, the report demonstrates that there are no European protected species present, or certainly at the time of the survey they weren't, and that there are mitigation measures that would mitigate any potential impacts, including avoiding removing any natural growth during the bird nesting season, erecting bird boxes, bat-sensitive lighting, etc. So, yes, it's a relevant issue, but the issue is that your statutory consultee on that issue doesn't actually object to the impact on biodiversity subject to conditions to mitigate any potential impacts.
Thank you. Councillor Healy. Oh, sorry.
We were working through, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just mindful that we need to complete that exercise before the, yeah?
Well, I'm content that what Councillor Perdue-Horan has pointed out should be given the weight that I require, rather than the opposite point of view which has been put forward. Thank you.
Chairman, I obviously have to advise you of the situation. Indeed. So it's impact on biodiversity, which I guess addresses the reason number one, increased harm to the environment. Am I correct?
Yes.
And the harm arising is just general in terms of the impact on species and habitats.
Yes.
Okay. Further detrimental impact on village life and scene. What would be the particular impact that would lead to a detrimental impact on village life and scene?
The view of the over the basin.
Yeah. I'm guessing noise.
And the view of the wharf itself.
And inappropriate noise.
Oh, yeah.
And just finally, Chairman, to finish off this exercise, the impact on the setting of the listed building, I guess, picks up on some of those points that Councillor Stockwood made in terms of interrupting the view of the listed building and the setting in terms of the impact of the structures.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I clearly have to be clear about the reasons.
Absolutely understood, yes. I was jumping the gun. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chairman. Just further to what Councillor Stockwood has said, I visited Hickling this week for the first time, and I've just realised what I've been missing. Absolutely super sport, recreational enjoyment, so on and so forth. But maybe what we need to consider impact-wise is, I understand this community is what's called a dark sky community. I don't know whether that's still the case, but I understand that lighting is turned off at midnight. Now, clearly, if there's boats moored and there's people accessing and to and fro, lights are going to be on. And lighting would be introduced to one of the key dark skies areas of the village, impacting on wildlife and bats and sleeping waterfowl, etc. So I do feel that's a consideration we need to make.
So your concerns about impact of lighting on...
Does the proposer accept that?
So do you accept that as part of your submission? Do you accept Councillor Healy's comments about lighting, impact of lighting?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Birdsall.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I think that's probably already been said now, but I just wanted to reinforce one of the reasons for rejection of the application. Yeah, sorry. I've visited there on many occasions, and my memory goes back to sitting there on a nice summer's day and looking across that basin and thinking, what a beautiful, tranquil place this is. And to me, there is an established scene of tranquility that's been established there for many, many years. We hear that the canal was ended in its use in the 30s, and no doubt there were some legacy boats there or equipment there over the years, but certainly in the last 30 years, I would guess, certainly in the last 20, that established scene of tranquility is established, and I think that is part of this rejection of this application, and I just wanted to clarify that is in there.
Fine, so we can add that as well then.
I had that already.
Right, okay. Right, does anybody else... Oh, sorry, Mr Norman, you want
Just want to check that the mover and the seconder are at one now on the reasons for refusal, because there's some...
So mover and seconder, that's Councillor Stockwood and Councillor Brennan. Are you happy with those additions to your proposals?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, okay, thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on this, or shall we move on? We've got recommendations being made to refuse permission for the reasons we've just discussed. Do we need to go through those reasons again, or are we all clear? No, I think we better go to a show of hands. So this is a recommendation to refuse permission for the reasons just discussed. Please show your hands. Please, no, please.
9, Chairman.
Anyone against? One against. And did we have any abstentions? One abstention. So that was nine. How many was it? Seven?
9.
No,
9, 1.
so 9 in favour of refusal, one against and one abstention. So refusal, permission is refused. Thank you. Yes, shall we go on to this last slide? Because we can't go to right, ladies, we've still got a meeting to conduct here.
Have a gavel.
Chairman, we do need to consider.
Yes.
Well, shall we move?
Sorry?
Extend.
No, it's Chairman's discretion.
Right, okay.
You'll no doubt take the sounding of the
James
meeting.
from my day.
Yeah, no, you're perfectly right. It's only an exception for the planning committee. It was part of the...
Right, can we, we've still got items, a meeting to run here, so thank you. It's coming up to 5 to 10. Now we have a cut-off point of 10 o'clock, but we are able to go on till 10:30. We have 2 more applications to discuss. My suggestion is that we carry on with this next application and see how it goes. And if we're still going at 10:30, we have to go. Excuse me, please. Excuse me. I'm sorry, we're running a meeting. I know you're very happy, and that's good, but we've got to get on. So it's 6 minutes to 10 now. If we go on to our next application, which is
Just 10 o'clock is my cut-off point. I need to take some medication round about that
well,
time,
if
so-
you have to leave, you have to leave.
I'll have to leave.
I understand. I absolutely understand. So we need to get on, and this time it's the Unicorn's Head at Langer, construction of a serving kiosk, and it's it's a construction of a serving kiosk. And Mr. Pegram, please.
Chairman, I will try and be as quick. Clearly, I have to give the application the attention it requires. The application is retrospective. It relates to the Unicorn Pub in Langer. The pub buildings are shown in the centre of the site there. Pub car park. Sorry, Chairman. To the south. Yeah, I haven't been to the pub yet. No. And there's an open area here which contains a children's play area. The building you're considering tonight is roughly almost centrally located, which is a log cabin for a serving kiosk, around about 3.25 metres wide by 2.5 metres deep. Wrong button. That's the aerial photograph. This is the pub building itself. We are in a conservation area here. You can see, looking across the site, the pub building, the car park I mentioned to the south, the open area with the children's play area. The building we're considering is this black one you can just see in the picture there. Recent addition to the area has been, I think, this bus stop at the front, which Conservation Officer considers somewhat conflicting if that's inappropriate, and yet that's been built. But clearly we didn't have to have looking across the, that's better, started again, like that. Looking across the open space to the pub, again, the building we're looking at here is the kiosk. Looking through, the kiosk is there. Looking again across, it's adjacent that building. And looking through the seating area, that's the serving kiosk that we are considering. It's roughly 19 metres from the northern boundary of the site, which is the one of the nearest properties, and it's 28 metres from the frontage of the site. It is a retrospective application, Chairman. As originally submitted, it was more gaudy colours and themed. They have painted it, as you see, a matte black colour. That has satisfied your conservation officer. He is of the opinion that it won't cause harm to the conservation area. As I say, this is the building in question, the plans of that building. And the other aspect, Chairman, of this is not only the visual impact. Clearly there is an aspect in terms of a consideration of the potential to exacerbate noise from the pub. However, Chairman, as set out in the report, it is stated that the building is only going to be used in association with events that are subject to a special events licence. My understanding is that you can only have special events for a maximum of 21 days in the year. There's a further restriction that limits the number of special events applications you can make. So effectively it's not 21 one-day events, it's lesser events but totalling no more than 21 days. And there are conditions recommended to address the use of the building and limit its activity and usage. Chairman, it's not considered to have an adverse impact on the conservation area, any nearby listed buildings or the surrounding environment. Your officers and your environmental health officers are satisfied that with the conditions recommended it won't have an adverse impact on the amenities of neighbours, and on that basis it's before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Pegram. We have one speaker on this item. There's the ward member for the area, Councillor Cumberlack, please.
It's freezing now.
We've actually, we've turned the heating sort of up.
It's freezing now.
What is it about air conditioning? No. Councillor Cumberlack, please.
This is a retrospective and resubmission. Environmental Health Officer's original comments on application 18-02574 are still relevant. The only substantive difference is inclusion of a noise management plan. The very need for a noise management plan acknowledges potential for disturbance to neighbours attempting to enjoy their private amenity space in the shadow of a Grade 2 listed building. There's no comment from the Conservation Officer. The ability to purchase the alcohol directly from the kiosk in the pub garden will lead to increased noise. There's always more noise around bars. Alcohol fuels noise levels. Noise travels at night. I'm not a killjoy. The pub has a beer garden similar to many rural pubs. Patrons can purchase their drinks from inside the pub in the usual way. We're informed this outdoor bar would only be used under a temporary events notice for which there can be 12 per year, but up to 21 days. Outdoor events take place in summer. This equates to virtually every week, at a time when neighbours will be enjoying their own back gardens. 3 attempts at a noise management plan. The current plan states that in general, there will be no live or recorded music outside unless part of an event. In general leaves considerable scope and cannot be enforced. The Parish Council noted no decibel levels mentioned when monitoring noise levels. The plan relies on a subjective approach. Members should read the Environmental Health Officer's report regarding impact on immediate neighbours. Perhaps Mr Pegram will read the relevant paragraph later. Members should also note the noise report states noise would be monitored at boundaries with windows shut. To keep windows shut is not reasonable on a hot summer's evening, nor is it reasonable to prevent neighbours enjoying their gardens because of neighbouring activity. Apparently the noise management plan is created and owned by the DPS, responsible for its implementation. Licensing law states a DPS, designated premises supervisor, does not have to be present on the premises at all times. How can they then test compliance? The NPPF states the planning policies and decisions should also ensure new development is appropriate for its location, taking into account the likely effects of noise on health and living conditions. They should A, mitigate and reduce to a minimum potential adverse impacts resulting from noise, B, identify and protect tranquil areas which have remained relatively undisturbed by noise, C. Limit the impact of light pollution. Environmental Health received continuous complaints about the noise in the last 2 years, large numbers, particularly this and last summer, resulting from the opening of the kiosk. One registered only last week and reported to police. At the time of the previous application, Environmental Health rejected the application on several grounds. 1. History of complaints about patron noise, number increasing during the period in which the kiosk has been in use. 2. Development is likely to add to adverse noise impacts on quality of life. Licensing officer comments, no sale of alcohol from the kiosk without a licence. The garden is not licensed for the sale of alcohol. The only difference in this and the previous withdrawn application is the introduction of a noise management plan, which I've proved fails. The wish to increase revenue and viability of the premises is very laudable, but not at the expense of the neighbours and village community, tranquil rural conservation area, location and listed building status. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kamperlak. Mr Pegram, would you like to come back on those points, please?
Very briefly, Chairman. In terms of the noise measurement, and no mention of decibel levels, I know Councillor Kamperlak did speak to me about this previously, and she did ask that I read the relevant paragraph from the consultee's comments. Having reviewed the report, Chairman, the consultee's comments are on page 241, paragraph 14, largely repeated verbatim, so I don't intend to read that out, if that's okay, Chairman.
That's absolutely fine.
Councillor Kamperlak said that the previous Environmental Health Officer's comments on the previous application were still valid. Clearly, the assessment of noise and impact on amenity is still a valid consideration. However, your Environmental Health Officer is satisfied with the information that's now been submitted to enable him to not object subject to certain conditions. The difficulty, Chairman, with measuring decibel ratings is it's ideal if you've got mechanical noise, and most of the reports and the advice is based on mechanical noise. So if you've got extract ventilation or plant and equipment, that is when you can accurately measure decibel ratings and noise from equipment. Unfortunately, it's not as easily applied, or it doesn't apply at all really to people noise. And it's therefore it is more of a subjective assessment of the application. Just on the final point, Chairman, the reason there are no Conservation Officer comments reported in the report is quite simply because the Conservation Officer was the case officer in this instance. So his comments are contained within the report. In particular, paragraph 35 deals with the issue of section 66 of the Listed Building Conservation Areas Act. Paragraph 37 deals with section 72, again concluding that the proposal causes no harm to either the setting of the listed building or to the special character and appearance of the conservation area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Pegram. Right, we're open to discussion and debate and decision. Who would like to start on this one, please? Councillor Gray, thank you.
Just a quick, and excuse me if this is flippant, but it says here that the Unicorn's Head Public House has operated as a public house since 1717. Do we know if any of the neighbours who would be affected by the noise of this public house purchased their properties before this was a public house?
I think the answer is no. No, we don't know. But thank you for your point. Councillor Major.
There's a bit of a discrepancy here. I just wanted to clarify. So at one point it says there's 12, you could apply for 12 temporary events licences across the year, and then in paragraph 26 it increases to 15. So I just wanted to...
Which is the other paragraph you're looking at?
So it's 12 in paragraph 6, and then it turns to, in paragraph 26 it becomes 15. I just wanted to clarify what figure that is.
Paragraph 6.
26.
26. So 26 is 15 and 6 is 12.
So
26.
Can I suggest, Chairman, because obviously I'm not a licensing officer, that we work on the worst case scenario, that it's 15 events in a year, but not totaling more than 21 days. That's the critical part. Yep. You can't have more than 21 days under a special events licence.
And just so I'm fully understanding, it doesn't have a licence to sell alcohol in as it stands. because it's not a licensed building in itself, and it closes at 9 p.m.
Yes, it closes at 9,
The site, yeah, the site would have.
But
Is that what you meant?
But you're not selling alcohol from that kiosk.
No, that would be an ancillary structure to the. Yes.
It's purely food and soft drinks.
I think the proposal.
Chairman, paragraph 15,
yeah.
licensing have also made comments reiterating that there is no alcohol licence for the structure, so I stand corrected. It sounds like the structure would require its own
Councillor Thomas.
Where the extra noise is coming from. Presumably there's people in the garden and they're either getting their drinks and food from the kiosk or they're getting it from inside the pub. What is generating extra noise? Is there equipment in this kiosk, or you know, what was the thought about the extra noise that's been generated by the fact that this kiosk is there?
Chairman, I don't think there's any equipment in the kiosk. Or not that would generate significant noise anyway. My perception of reading the comments and the councillor's comments, I don't know what's happening with the mic system. It keeps dropping out. We'll shout. I'll raise my voice. I'm on. I think the perception is that the kiosk will mean that patrons don't have to go back into the pub necessarily to get food and soft drinks. There's also a suggestion that the presence of the kiosk may result in unsupervised children playing in the adjacent play area, and I think that's in part what the concerns are. And I'm getting a nod from the ward councillor, so I think I've hit the nail on the head there. So thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Right. Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my understanding of TENS, temporary event notices, is 12 notices a year maximum. And it is important that there is a time limit on those notices. So I think there is a significant difference between having to apply for temporary event notices and just simply having an extended licence for existing premises. I must declare an interest at this stage because although I am not the county councillor for Langer, Langer is part of Langer and Barnston parish, and Barnston falls within my division, so I attend the Langer and Barnston parish council meetings. I haven't been there for a while, but I have attended in the past. And I have heard myself the experiences of local residents to this pub, where there has been difficulties in the past involving illegal activities. I'm not saying the pub in any way encouraged that, of course not, but the police have been involved.
Just 1 second, Francis.
If Councillor Purdue-Horan is declaring an interest, is he allowed to give us information about what he's heard and what he hasn't heard? Thank you.
Sorry, the interest is not as ward member.
No.
No, I'm the county councillor,
Yes. County councillor
for the area, and I'm imparting information that I've picked up in the past related directly.
I think you're not really declaring an interest. You're just using that as a terminology, aren't you?
You're saying it's an interest, but it's not one that's going to affect your judgment in any way.
I have knowledge of previous experience of residents from activities.
Sorry, one further word of caution. Councillor Purdue-Horan is talking about illegal activities. Those matters are not for consideration by this committee. Whether they're associated with this kiosk or just the pub in general, we don't have the details of that, and I don't think it's appropriate that those issues are raised in connection with the consideration of this application. I don't know whether Mr. Norman has a view on that, Chairman.
I wasn't sure what Councillor Purdue-Horan was going on to say, but certainly if it's about in the specific instances, then that would not be relevant. We're talking about the general.
I'm putting my remarks into context. that
Let's just get on with it.
I'm not convinced that it has been demonstrated that sufficient supervision would be applied in this particular application, this retrospective application. And what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, is I cannot support the recommendation to approve in this report.
Thank you. Well, that's fine. I mean, everyone has their view and opinion, and we'll be taking a vote in a few minutes, and no doubt the vote will reflect what you've just said. But to answer Councillor Thomas's question, no, I don't. There's no declarations of interest there. It was just a figure of speech because Councillor Purdue-Horan has heard people referring to the.
He did start by saying, "I have
yes,
to
he
declare."
did, and perhaps it wasn't a very helpful choice of words, but it's as a legal.
Chairman, just to be clear, he's used that phrase, but what he is saying, I understand, and I'm looking to Councillor Purdue-Horan to confirm it, that interest is not prejudicial. It doesn't affect his judgment in any way in terms of how he determines this application. It's no different to the interest in nature to that which was declared early on, being a member of a trust which doesn't affect or is not likely to prejudice or affect the judgment in deciding this matter. I think that's what you're saying. Yes, thank you.
Good. Can we move on? Councillor Murray, please.
Well, I'm thinking, having grandchildren, that actually the hut would help because you don't have to go into the pub to buy the food. You could get to drink, but you can buy soft drinks and get food from the hut. So you wouldn't be leaving them on their own, which is quite irresponsible. You know, if you're taking children, you need to be with them to make sure they do behave and are safe.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, any other speakers on this one then, no? Right.
Councillor Thomas wishes to speak.
Oh, Councillor Thomas, I wasn't sorry.
I was wondering if I could propose that we accept the recommendation.
Thank you. So you're moving the recommendation as per the report?
Yes.
Okay, do you have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Gray, I think I saw your hand go up first. So we've got the recommendation moved and seconded. I think we've had quite a good discussion on this, and unless anyone else is desperate to speak on it, we'll go to a vote. So can I have a show of hands in favour of the recommendation as shown in the report?
8, Chairman.
8. Anyone against? 1 against.
Two against.
2 against, right.
Any abstentions?
Any abstentions? 1 abstention. So that's 8 for, 2 against and 1 abstention. So permission is granted as per the report. Thank you.
We've got 5 minutes.
Public's still here. I think you ought to.
Yes. Are you here for this application?
Yeah.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Pardon?
The applicant's representative is not.
Right. We've got one more application to go. We've got a member of the public here who's been extremely patient all night. I think we ought to hear this if we're happy with this. So 21 Gordon Road, West Bridgford. Not quite ready for you, but by all means sit there. Change of use treatment for consulting rooms to a retail, extension to the shop front and partial demolition of boundary wall. Mr.
Sorry, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Murray. Yes, you need to
thank
leave. We are
on the
still
back
calling.
table.
And Mr. Taylor, please. Oh, could you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I just moved my microphone so everyone here. The application seeks planning permission for a change of use of an existing treatment and consulting room to a retail use. The extension to the existing front projecting facade and the partial demolition of an existing boundary wall at 21 Gordon Road in West Bridgford. The site is one half of a semi-detached building located on the corner of Gordon Road and Blake Road. If I just move the plans on, this plan on the screen outlines the building in question, and you can see that the building fronts onto Gordon Road, which is the building running north-south on the plan in front of you, but because it's a corner plot, it also has a facade that is publicly visible onto Blake Road. Currently the main part of the site fronting onto Gordon Road is trading as a beauticians, and to the rear there is an extension that has a retail use. The neighbouring half of the property is a residential dwelling fronting onto Gordon Road and is separated from the site by a mix of low fencing and mature, dense hedging. Again, if we just go through the aerial photograph, this is the frontage of the site from Gordon Road. Some views down Gordon Road. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that the street is predominantly commercial in terms of its ground floor activities. On the left-hand side of that image, it is more mixed in terms of there are residential uses interspersed with residential buildings. The application has attracted objections from the neighbouring property, and their concerns have been summarised in the report and the late representations, and I'm aware that we have a speaker who will be exercising his right to speak momentarily. The concerns relate to the demolition of the wall and the extension of the front facade, which will encourage more activity within the unit, and the resultant loss of privacy, production of noise, litter and disturbance from the potential congregation of undesirables undertaking in antisocial activity. The revisions were sought to the initial submission plans during its assessments, which have amended the design of the front projection and also proposed a tall fence along the front common boundary between the two sites, so between the application site and the neighbouring property. It's also proposed by way of conditions to restrict the trading hours to help minimise any impact on privacy, and also to require a barrier in the form of a timber fence, require a barrier between the two that will prevent litter blowing onto the forecourt of the neighbouring property, and also a condition requiring a barrier to prevent any frontage parking onto the site. So that's parking from Gordon Road directly at the front of the proposed extended facade. Members may also be aware that there is a policy in the emerging local plan which seeks to encourage retail uses being retained along Gordon Road, as it's an aspiration to promote commercial activity within areas designated as secondary frontages. If I continue through the photographs, again, this is just a flavour of the commercial activity that occurs on the opposite side of the road to the proposed development. Again, flavour of the mixture of activities. The application site is just on the corner, the right-hand edge of the property, so you can see the stone wall on the gates there and the sign for the existing beautician. The property on the other side of that junction is a mixture of residential in one half and commercial at ground floor on the other, so a similar relationship does exist. I'm not saying they're directly comparable, but there are existing similar relationships elsewhere within the immediate vicinity. This image shows the view from Blake Road, so you've got the main body, the two-storey brick built property, which has the beauticians trading at ground floor and the retail elements from the extension to the rear of the property. These are the plans before members. How do I get the red dot on the screen? Right. The dotted outline here shows the existing projection on the front of the building. The solid line that I'm attempting to trace at the moment shows the degree of enlargement that members are being asked to consider at this point in time. This plan shows how the revision would look if it were to be granted permission, and the location and design of the barrier between the application site and the neighbouring property, which would be located along this line here. Again, I think that's just a larger version of the same plan that's been duplicated. Apologies for that. Here's a copy of the emerging plan. As I say, it largely promotes the retention of A1 uses within shopping areas to stop them being diluted through the emergence of other non-retail activities such as takeaway foods that would potentially erode the retail aspirations of the local authority to have retail uses in retail areas. And again, a plan that shows the primary shopping frontages in red. So this is Central Avenue. The application site is this one on the corner here. The blue lines are what are defined as these secondary, just get the correct terminology, the secondary frontages where growth is being aspirationally promoted within the authority. Given the proposal is for change of use from an existing beauty business to a retail one, and that the proposed alterations to the frontage are modest in scale and the mitigation measures proposed by means of conditions, officers are of the view that the proposal is acceptable and the application is therefore recommended for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Now, we do have a public speaker on this, You've been very. You must be Mr. Jackas. Mr. Yahaj. Thank you. So, as you will have seen from this evening, you have up to 5 minutes to talk to us. As soon as you're ready, the clock will start counting down. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me this opportunity to let you know my thoughts on the planning application for 21 Gordon Road, and in particular on the reasons why, with respect, I must disagree with your principal planning officer's recommendation to approve the proposals. I think I can fairly summarise your officer's appraisal report by saying that he is quite rightly being guided by the council's planning policies and has noted how he needs to consider the amenity of any neighbouring residential occupiers. However, he has decided that most, if not all, of my concerns over loss of privacy, increases in litter, noise and disturbance, the increased risk of antisocial behaviour very close to my front door, also nuisance from intrusive artificial light from the development after dark, could all be reasonably prevented or alleviated by simply erecting a 2-metre high timber fence between my front garden and the front paved area of the proposed shop. He therefore considers there is no significant adverse effect on residential amenity for the occupier of number 23, even though it is a semi-detached house attached to the subject property and the front doors to these properties are only 2.8 metres apart. With respect, his deliberations in this case seem unduly dismissive of most of my grounds for objection, and I hope, well, I shall try to explain why. In his appraisal report, the officer has pointed out the council's decision to include the subject property within the boundary of the main town centre of West Bridgford for planning purposes. He seems, as a consequence, to consider that someone living within that boundary must, in addition to putting up with increases in footfall and disturbance on the public highway, also accept the same sort of footfall and disturbance on private land very close to the front door of their home. On this point, I must disagree. As far as I'm aware, the 2005 and 2007 planning consents for 21 Gordon Road were not for A1 retail use, only for beauty treatment rooms. Any current use, I believe, current retail use, is, I believe, therefore unauthorised. Access for customers has only been via the rear extension fronting Blake Road. Business at beauty therapy rooms is usually arranged by appointment, and I have not noticed customers gaining access through the front door facing Gordon Road. There would appear to have been little or no passing trade during the past 11 years. By contrast, the current application for A1 use proposes a shop front projecting well beyond the current building line, with display windows on all 3 sides of the extension and the demolition of the front boundary wall. All of these proposals are designed to attract passing trade and maximise footfall at the front of the premises. It is therefore inevitable that if this application is approved, activity within the paved area at the front of number 21 would greatly increase. The display windows of the new shop will be only 3 metres from my front door and 6 metres from my front bay window. With respect, I was disappointed by one of the officer's comments suggesting that residents at this location might regard increases in footfall, noise and antisocial behaviour from developments as usual activity expected in a commercial town centre. This seems to me to be an inappropriate approach to making what should be a very fine judgment on what is or is not a significant adverse effect on amenity for remaining residents. The officer's thinking also appears to have been led by an assumption that the east side of Gordon Road, containing the odd number of properties, is no different from the west side, containing the even number of properties. Whilst properties on the west side of Gordon Road between Tudor Square and Gordon Square were all converted to commercial use many years ago, I will point out that on the east side, only 6 properties are in commercial use, with the other 6 remaining in residential use. I therefore maintain that the east side of Gordon Road is not yet part of an established retail area, and as such should perhaps be treated with a little more sensitivity and other parts of the area that have been designated as West Bridgford's main town centre. In my copy of the committee's agenda, the Planning Office has not mentioned any detail of a 2018 application which may or may not have a bearing on this particular case. I would explain that in 2018 there was an application to convert the dwelling at number 25 into a ground floor shop with a front extension.
Right, I'm afraid
Right,
you're
sorry.
bang on time.
Right.
And we do have to be quite strict. I'm sure you understand. But you got through a lot of material, a lot of information for us there.
Thank you.
And thank you again for your patience for being here tonight. It's
Okay.
been a long evening. So, Mr. Yarhatch, yes, is concerned about loss of privacy, noise and disturbance, possible light interference, and the comparison between one side of Gordon Road and the other side being retail or more retail as opposed to residential or vice versa. So we've heard his concerns. Can we pick up on any of those, please?
Of course, Chairman. Photographs are quite clear. Don't dispute anything that the Speaker has said in terms of the levels of activity that occur on the opposite sides of Gordon Road. Almost entirely commercial activity occurring on one side. I think the Speaker said, and I won't dispute it, 6 commercial, 6 residential on the side of the property the side of the street where the application property is. It is a consideration that the existing property has a business use. It is not an A1 retail use. It is a use as a beauty therapist, but it is not a residential property. Officers are satisfied, having consulted with colleagues in environmental health, that subject to the conditions suggested in the report, that the relationships would be acceptable, and that colleagues in environmental health were not raising grounds for objection on loss of privacy or impact on amenity as a result of noise disturbance from the change of use from that beauty business to a retail activity occurring on the site.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Right, we can go to discussion and debate now. So, Councillor Thomas, please.
I have got a question about the use. It says change of use of treatment consulting room to retail in the title and the proposal. In paragraph 2, it says the proposal is for sales area associated with the beauty therapy use. So is it a mixed use? Is that what's being proposed? So what will be the use class of this after the application?
Sorry, there are multiple lights on. I didn't want to interrupt or cut off in mid-flow, as it were. I think you're right. It would be a mixed use. It would. I've not dealt directly with the application. I've been to site. I know where the property is, but I've not been inside the building. My understanding is there are retail elements and there are treatment elements. The applicants are looking to move more towards the retail elements. Whether or not that treatment element would continue or not, I'm not 100% certain. I'm not going to guide, but Mr. Pegram may seem to know more.
Yes, Chairman. As I understand it, there's a physiotherapy on the site at the moment, and the front part is a beautician. The retail element, I understand, is a complementary retail activity, selling goods associated with the physiotherapy. So somewhere in the report, it does talk about, was it lingerie and sports good? Huh?
Paragraph 2.
Thank you,
It's
Councillor Major.
It's bespoke lingerie, fashion
Yes.
and sportswear with specific attention paid to post-surgery needs.
So it's complementary to the physiotherapy activity, which will continue at the back of the building. The only element that's discontinuing is the beauty therapy element at the front.
So is it just the title and the proposal that's inaccurate at this point, or could that cause problems with the planning application?
No, I think the issue is that the consulting rooms, which are clearly identified on the plans, are changing from consulting rooms to retail. Effectively, arguably, there is already a mixed use on this site, and it will continue to be a mixed use. But clearly, the plans demonstrate or state which parts of the building are going to be used for retail purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak on this one? Or any questions, any queries, any observations, any recommendations?
We need to decide.
I think we need to. Right. Well, I think we need to. We need to make it. Well, I suspect we're ready to make a decision. So we've got to make Councillor Brennan.
Yes, can I recommend that we move to agree the recommendation in the paper?
As per the report.
Yes.
Right. Do you have a seconder for that, please, Councillor Verdi? Right. We've had the recommendation in the report moved and seconded. Does anyone else wish to say anything, or shall we go to a decision? Go to a decision. Show of hands for those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
H, Chairman.
Anyone against?
One against, Chairman.
And I don't think there's anyone else in this. There's no abstentions. So permission is granted as per the report. So thank you for your attendance. But please note there are conditions in the permission that's being given, and they will be watched. Right, that's the final planning application for tonight. Very briefly, item 5 is to note appeal decisions. Do we want to say anything about those?
No, Chairman, there's nothing in particular. Can I just state, though, can I ask, including the resident that's present, please don't go out through the side doors. The alarms are now set in the leisure centre, so we do need to evacuate the building through the rear doors and out the side, so otherwise we'll end up with the police running around.
So,
yes.
If you go, well,
three double doors, turn left.
You must turn left.
Sorry, Chairman.
You're right. So, well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're just over time. It's been a long evening, but I hope you understand why. And thank you for your contributions. And we'll look forward to the next meeting. We'll get the heating sorted out, hopefully, as well. And doesn't it go to show that I'll turn this off? Doesn't it go the fascination?